also, who's been all over this for us outside Downing Street there. Catherine, thank you. Look, what is the very, very latest? Because that's been a busy shop front behind you there so far today, hasn't it?
Yes, it certainly has. Things have moved very fast, and now we have new appointments to the vacated roles of Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary. The new Deputy Prime Minister is Oliver Dowden, a big supporter of Rishi Sunak, very well liked, a safe pair of hands. The new Justice Secretary is Alex Chalk, again a supporter of Rishi Sunak, MP for Cheltenham, a massive promotion for him. But really, quite a lot of fallout from Dominic Raab's resignation. Although the Prime Minister sent a acceptance letter singing his praises and very warm and effusive about his achievements, Dominic Raab's resignation letter was clearly very angry. He pointed out that of all the allegations, only 2 of them had actually been upheld, and of those 2, he said its 2 adverse findings are flawed and set a dangerous precedent for the conduct of good government. Now, it was specifically, while he was at the Foreign Office, it was found that he acted in a way which was intimidating, and also at the Ministry of Justice, that on a number of occasions at meetings with policy officials, the Deputy Prime Minister acted in a manner which was intimidating. Now, Dominic Raab is deeply unhappy. He wrote a really excoriating piece in The Telegraph, which came out shortly after his resignation. He was saying that these complaints really shouldn't have been accepted because they hadn't been made at the appropriate time, that normally there'd be a cut-off for complaints, that he'd never been warned previously that his behaviour would be seen as bullying. So he is clearly deeply, deeply unhappy, but Rishi Sunak will really want this all to go away now and hope that he will be allowed to focus on his 5 priorities, because this is a huge distraction from those.
Yeah, look, Catherine, thank you very, very much. Catherine Forster, our political reporter outside Downing Street for us. Catherine will be there with any updates as and when we get them. But I think this opens up a fascinating conversation, which we will be having throughout the course of this show, which is it possible to be a demanding, driven, sometimes potentially quite blunt boss, and also not fall foul of things like the definition of bullying that this report included? I just want to say here, in Raab's letter, I had not once in 4.5 years sworn or shouted at anyone. And some key allegations that Raab lobbies back here, and I'm just going to read these out for you right now, if you don't mind, which is that he says that there was a trial by media initially, so civil servants were leaking information, some of it completely untrue, to the press for the best part of a year. He says that HR guidance didn't apply to him, and that no claims were put to him in writing about people's allegations of misconduct, etc. He says on 4 occasions he was told he had a clean bill of health, and the only warnings he got that might have changed were from informal tip-offs. Now, I do want to pose the question later on to the head of the Civil Service Union, the General Secretary, as to whether or not their own employees would not have a case, a grievance to lodge here if they had been essentially dismissed or a report found against them in that manner. But I also want to have a quick look at some of the, I think, maybe more interesting elements of the civil service and how they go about their business. And to help me do this, I'm joined now by the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie. Kelvin, thank you very much for popping up on this show. Any second now, I believe, Kelvin Mackenzie, the former editor of The Sun, will join us. Yes, there he is. Right, Kelvin, let's just start with first things first. Do you think that there will be a lot of very nervous bosses and nervous people today who are reading what constitutes bullying and either you resign or we'll sack you rules in this day and age, when actually a lot of people might say this is quite normal office behaviour?
Well, if as it now emerges, I mean, this is a shocking example. By the way, I don't think Sunak emerges well out of this either, OK? So Sunak wasn't prepared to say, as I suspect Boris would have done, actually get on with it. You've only been found guilty of 2 out of the 8. And if one of them was considered saying the words, "you are utterly useless," then honestly, within the civil service, I imagine that would probably apply to about 98.9% of them anyway. So what have they got to complain about? What they didn't like was the fact that he gave colleagues a hard stare. You know what I mean? A hard stare. Okay, and if that's it, that's nothing. When you have big policy decisions, you have big commercial decisions to make. There is a lot of angst going on in the room. On the basis of Dominic Raab being fired, can I be honest with you? Rupert Murdoch would have probably been fired 28 million times. I mean, I have seen him explode and rant and rave and everything. And actually, you just had to get on with it. Why? Because, yes, it blew up, it blew down, and then you all moved on. What the civil service are saying is we are not prepared to take any kind of irritability for an error that has been made either on my
can
part
I ask Calvin,
or on a lot of people's part.
Can I ask Calvin, and I think this is a really essential thing that I want to get from you. You are somebody who has operated at the sharp end of the British media industry, I hope you don't mind me saying now, for decades, OK? And that involves an incredibly high amount of pressure, OK? And is it possible to operate in a job with that amount of pressure while singing Come By Our to all your staff all the time?
Well, I do think things have changed, OK? As you nicely pointed out, I've been around for a long time. I think today's employees and youngsters now do not want to be told when they have made an error, and if they have made an error, they don't want to be told in a manner which they are unused to, because their parents themselves have probably been very friendly to them, whereas my father spent 5 years in a prisoner of war camp. You know, he was a tough old nut. So I do recognise there's been a change, but clearly, Sunak has let Raab hang out to dry. Now, the truth about the matter is that I'm afraid that Mr. Raab would not get in at the next election anyway. He came very close to it in 2019. He's a goner, I'm afraid, and he knew that. And I wonder whether he just said to himself, I've had enough of this. I'd be very interested to see whether he hangs on. I just wonder
if there is more evidence for the kind of culture in the civil service that Dominic Raab says the public should be worried about. And I'm going to go into this in a couple of minutes with some examples on the screen, Calvin, but of snowflake culture, woke culture maybe getting in the way of people actually doing things, or a pushback, an ideological difference between people in the civil service who are supposed to be there to facilitate government and the people who are actually in government. Look at the people who've had issues with the civil service recently. We've had Priti Patel, we've had Suella Braverman, and now we've had Dominic Raab. And I think there is a strong case to say that there is more evidence for the kind of obstructive behaviour of the civil service than there maybe is for Dominic Raab being a vicious, psychotic bully.
I mean, that's a very... Well, first of all, what is absolutely clear in that report is he's not a vicious and psychotic bully. The truth about the matter is that even that KC agrees he never swore, he never raised his voice. You try and find somebody in a position of authority with big issues crashing at them through their front door who wouldn't feel aggravated at some point. But the point you make is very good. Could it simply be that these are people who, by the way, can't wait for the Conservatives to be thrown out and have seen an opportunity in which to humiliate their boss? I suspect there's a lot of that in all this. However, I don't know. What I do know is that I have met Mr. Raab a couple of times, and he is quite a quiet guy, but there's clearly a lot pumping under him. I don't mind that. I want people. The issue with the civil servants is the following. So I come in, I'm a minister, I say, we must do this, we must do that. And the first thing that a civil servant will say, yes, Minister, very good idea, but, did you know about the 2010 Rhubarb Act? Did you know about this? Did you know about that? And if you are a driven person and you're in commercial life, you smash through the butts.
Well,
in the civil service, you complain you complain about the reaction that you got from the minister.
Kelvin, thank you, as ever. Kelvin Mackenzie there, former editor of The Sun, giving a two-part reaction now. What it's like to actually be a boss at the top end of a very, very high-pressure job, acknowledging wholeheartedly, though, that times have very much changed since Kelvin was running roughshod over Fleet Street. But also, as well, just talking about the perceived culture in the civil service. I'm going to get more on that, actually, with the General Secretary of the Civil Service Union. I think that's going to be a fascinating chat because there are a lot of issues at play here, so I'm going to drill down into that. But some breaking news just coming to us right now, which is that Braintree District Council has lost a High Court bid to prevent the government housing asylum seekers in Wethersfield Airfield in Essex. This has been a big story for us. I'm going to go now to GBNews' Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's going to explain all of this to us. Mark, you've been all over this story. This has been a deeply controversial topic, and it centres around whether or not the government can, despite massive public objection, plonk a migrant centre in, essentially, a town that is believed to be quite unfit for it. Mark, take it away. What's just happened?
Yeah, well, this is Braintree District Council, the local authority that covers that former RAF base, Wethersfield, which is just near the town of Braintree in Essex. They had sought an injunction at the High Court to stop these plans by the Home Office to put 1,700 young male asylum seekers into this former RAF base. The judge has just ruled, after listening to evidence earlier in the week, that he has not got the jurisdiction to pass that injunction, to grant such an injunction. So he has ruled in the favour of the government here. Now, does that mean that the government can go ahead and start putting asylum seekers into the base? Well, it might, but we need to see really what the next move is from Braintree District Council and other potential opponents to this. There was a suggestion that they may seek a judicial review at the High Court at some point. They haven't indicated that they are definitely going to do that yet. But if they do that, clearly that is going to potentially delay the progress of these plans by the government. And Patrick, you can't overstate just how important these plans are for the Home Office, dealing with a growing crisis of people coming across the English Channel. We heard from the government lawyer earlier in the week that they're expecting 56,000 people to come across in small boats this year, on top of the more than 45,000 who came last year. And they're estimating that as a result of that, and other people already being housed within the asylum system, that they will need between 120 and 140 houses, hotels, other suitable accommodation for these asylum seekers. So one thing they want to do as a matter of urgency is go and locate these bigger purpose-built or specially adapted accommodation centres. Ministry of Defence bases, government-owned land is one potential solution they see. But of course, the local communities, Patrick, don't want thousands of asylum seekers on their doorstep either.
Mark, thank you very, very much. Mark White there, Home and Security Editor, bringing you that breaking news about the Braintree District Council losing its High Court battle against the Home Office for housing migrants in their area. More on that as we get it with Mark. Thank you. Right, now, let's get back to that Dominic Raab story. I just wanted to have a little look at the civil service, because this is what it centres around, really. Obviously, Dominic Raab's behaviour towards civil servants, but also what kind of environment is he operating in? Was he operating in? So, civil servants were able to go on hundreds of, quotes, wellness, inclusion and diversity courses until Jacob Rees-Mogg got rid of them last year. Check out some of these courses. So one was called Leading Without Authority, OK? And there were two separate courses as well called Microaggressions and Micro-Behaviours. And there we go. Maybe Alan Partridge took the course that we call here Knowing Me, Knowing You. And one, I think, appropriately named at the end there, just called Give Me Strength. No, that is not my reaction. That really is the name of one of these training courses that we've got. I'm joined now by Dave Penman, who is the General Secretary of the FDA Union, who represents thousands of civil servants. Dave, thank you very much for joining me. Firstly, can I get your reaction to Raab's resignation, please?
An astonishing turn of events today, actually, that the Prime Minister having prevaricated for 24 hours allowed Dominic Raab the space to put his resignation letter out without any counterbalance around the facts, allowed him to publish a 2,000-word critique of the evidence, including potentially identifying some of the complainants without putting the evidence out, and then puts out a letter essentially congratulating him on his honourable resignation. So I don't think anyone who raised a complaint against Dominic Raab will think how the whole debacle has unfolded today is in any way a meaningful or fair process for handling these sorts of complaints.
Have a look into some of the reports coming out about the civil service, Dave, and the way it operates. I've outlined there some pretty snowflakey courses that people should go on. One official also said that they were told to spend a fifth of their corporate objective time working in corporate identity networks and to define goals to make civil service more inclusive. They said that they had to spend 5% of this in a non-binary network, which included attending a gender non-conforming book club and celebrating non-binary awareness week. And I just wonder whether or not there is more evidence of a bit of a work-shy culture, especially given that the civil service has around, as of August 2022, around 1 in 10 people off with long COVID, reportedly. Whether there is more evidence of the kind of culture that Dominic Raab was talking about than there is about Dominic Raab being a bully.
Right, but I mean, you talk about snowflakery. I mean, I don't know how you define a snowflake. Someone who can't take criticism, someone who blames everyone else for their own mistakes, someone who flops off in a huff. That's how Dominic Raab has responded to the criticisms that were levelled to him. So I think if there's any accusations of snowflakery, you can accuse Dominic Raab of being one. Look, the civil service is an organisation of 450,000 people. There's over 250 different organisations. They do everything from collect your tax to benefits, diplomats, school inspectors, people who help make sure the health service runs. You're always going to find examples where you say, oh, that's ridiculous, that's a course that I don't understand or I don't like. I know that when we ask our members, they're working on average 10, 12 hours extra every single week and not getting paid for it. They've got the lowest pay in the public sector. So if you want to talk about the civil service, let's deal with a lot of facts of the civil service, not just the odd course that you manage to find in mock.
OK. Dave, can I just put to you, there was a definition of bullying that was included in this report on Dominic Raab. I'm just going to read it now. Legitimate, reasonable and constructive criticism of a worker's performance will not amount to bullying. It defines bullying as intimidating or insulting behaviour that makes an individual feel uncomfortable, frightened, less respected or put down. So I think a lot of people will see that as potentially quite subjective. Could I just put one thing to you that Dominic Raab has obviously bit back, hasn't he, after this resignation? He said that he had a trial by media, so that there were leaks, many of them untrue, put out about him in the press before this report came out, that the HR guidance that applied to everybody else there didn't seem to apply to him. No claims were put to him in writing. He says that on 4 occasions he was told he had a clean bill of health, and that the only warnings he was given that something might be a bit off was through informal tip-offs. And the people whose complaints were levelled at him, Dave, were not subject to any kind of cross-examination and were allowed union representation at the time. If you were now representing Dominic Raab and not one of your union members, would you not concede that there is a pretty serious case here, that this might be a bit of a stitch-up, or there would be, had he not resigned, cases for unfair dismissal?
So, this stitch-up that you talk about, this is an independent report by a KC who was appointed by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister that Dominic Raab was the campaign manager for, the Prime Minister who appointed him as Deputy Prime Minister despite the fact that he knew there were concerns about his conduct. So is the Prime Minister part of this conspiracy? Dominic Raab says that no one ever told him any issue. That's not what the report says. The report says he was told on several occasions by 2 different permanent secretaries about concerns about his behaviour. And Dominic Raab has been touring the studios in advance of this report, saying that no one ever raised any issue with him, and that's been dispelled by this report. So, of course, if you take Dominic Raab's one side of this verse, you can say, isn't this an outrage? Isn't Dominic Raab being treated terribly? The Deputy Prime Minister of the country, those lowly civil servants have done for him. If you're a civil servant and you want to raise a complaint about a minister, the only place you can go, there's no procedure, there's nothing in guidance, you have to get the approval of the Prime Minister for it even to be investigated.
OK, just one more, Dave, if that's all right. I do really appreciate your time. Thank you very, very much. When we look at the people in recent times that the civil service appears to have had a massive problem with, I'm looking at Priti Patel, I'm looking at Suella Braverman, I'm looking at Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I'm looking at Dominic Raab. And from a complete outsider's perspective, it would appear as though the civil service might have a problem with anyone coming in and actually trying to enact conservative policies, which would maybe imply that there is an ideological difference between a lot of civil service staff and the people that they are supposed to be working for. And bear in mind that people like Dominic Raab are actually elected. Would you maybe concede that there is a big ideological gap and a block, really, between the civil service and members of the Conservative Party, and that that's a problem for the voter?
I would not. If you're a civil servant, you join the civil service knowing that you're going to have to serve the government of the day. I started as a civil servant in 1985 before I started working for unions. If I'd been in the civil service all that time, the vast majority of the time that I was there, I'd have been working for a Conservative government. The idea that there's some kind of ideological block is just nonsensical. What was the issue with Priti Patel? She shouted and swore at staff. That was found through an independent investigation. Jacob Rees-Mogg left insulting and demeaning comments on people's desks. I don't know what the issue with Suella Braverman is, because civil servants are loyally serving her and implementing her policies.
Yeah, again, it does appear to be quite subjective, David. I do take what you're saying, but I think the idea of leaving a note on someone's desk to say, I'm sorry I missed you because you're working at home, I mean, is that insulting and demeaning?
Absolutely, it's insulting and demeaning. He walked around the bit of the Cabinet Office that deals with national security, right? Putting notes on people's desks to make a point that they were not working from the office because he had an obsession about whether people were working from home. And that is insulting and demeaning behaviour. That's certainly how they took it. Some of the most senior civil servants in the country doing some of the most sensitive security work in the country being insulted and demeaned by a minister. Yes, I think that's insulting and demeaning.
All right. Dave, thank you very much. Grateful for your time. Dave Penman there is the General Secretary of the FDA union who represents thousands of civil servants. Right, ladies and gentlemen, get your views coming in. I haven't got time to go to them just now because we're way over, but I will do shortly. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Right, OK, so loads more coming your way for you. I do believe I'm about to throw over to some more breaking news for you now. Yes, I am. So some more breaking news. Just two Just Stop Oil protesters have scaled the Dartford Crossing Bridge and have been handed a prison sentence for causing a public nuisance. I'll start that one again. So this is the breaking news. So the two Just Stop Oil protesters who did scale a Dartford Crossing Bridge have now been handed a prison sentence for causing a public nuisance. Morgan Troland has been given 3 years. Marcus Decker has been sentenced to 2 years and 7 months. Extinction Rebellion are, of course, at it again as well, though. In other news as well, the group says that up to 50,000 people will take part in 4 days of protests in London. We will be at those protests. Not me personally, thankfully. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Loads to go out between now and 4 p.m, and I'll give you the absolute lot of it. We've got news of an £8 million fund to tackle homelessness among veterans, and a survey also says that a third of UK libraries have been asked to censor or remove books. So we'll be talking about all of that. Really, today in Britain, when I come back, though, I am really going to be going quite big on that idea now that veterans get £8 million as a whole. But when you look at the amount of money that we're giving to some other areas of society. Right now, though, headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. Here's the latest headlines from the GB newsroom at 3:35. Alex Chalk has been named as the new Justice Secretary following the resignation of Dominic Raab. The MP for Cheltenham is currently a Defence Minister and before his election was a barrister for 14 years. He's been filmed this afternoon arriving at the Ministry of Justice. And Oliver Dowden has been appointed as the new Deputy Prime Minister. He's currently serving as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Well, both appointments come after Dominic Raab resigned from government after a bullying inquiry found he acted in an intimidating and aggressive way towards staff. It's understood in one instance he criticised the work of civil servants as utterly useless. He was also found to have committed an abuse or misuse of power that undermined or humiliated officials. In some other breaking news, Braintree District Council has lost its High Court bid to stop the Weatherfield airfield in Essex being used to house asylum seekers. The government plans to accommodate as many as 1,700 migrants there for up to 6 months each. The judge said he did not have the legal power to grant the council's application for an injunction. And as you've been hearing in the last few minutes, 2 Just Up oil protesters, 40-year-old Morgan Troland and 34-year-old Marcus Decker, who scaled a bridge over the Dartford crossing last October, have been jailed. The pair used ropes and other equipment to climb the Queen Elizabeth II bridge between Essex and Kent last year. The judge at Southend Crown Court said they had to be punished in order to deter others from copying them. They received 3 years and 2 years and 7 months, respectively. You're watching GB News on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Back to Patrick. Patrick in a second, but first here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2388 and €1.1308. The price of gold is £1,597.24 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,910 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
OK, so what do you make of this? Up to £8 million has just been made available to tackle the issue of homelessness among armed forces veterans. Charities and other organisations can bid for cash to provide accommodation and other support for people who fought for this country but have fallen on hard times. Now, all of this might sound all right, OK, it's £8 million, oh, that's great, it's better than nothing, isn't it? But there are thousands of homeless veterans in the UK. A very conservative estimate puts that number at around 7,000. So what difference will £8 million really make? And when you look at it in the grand scheme of the fact that we've got, £7 million a day roughly going to tackle migrant hotels, etc., is this really enough? With me now is Trevor Colt, who was awarded the Military Cross. Trevor, thank you very much. This £8 million for veterans' issues, is it good or is it actually a bit insulting?
First of all, Patrick, thank you and thanks for having me on again. £8 million, it is a lot of money, and I have to take, I think most veterans today, we have to take our hat off to the hard work that Johnny Mercer's been doing behind the scenes. He's had an uphill struggle to achieve what he's achieved, but he has achieved quite a lot. Now, look at the £8 million. He made a bold statement today saying this government is going to end veterans' homelessness this year. It could be achieved easily, but I struggle with it, if I'm honest, because let's look at the £8 million. There's meant to be, say, 6,000 homeless veterans. If you pay £1,000 a month for their rent, no matter where they are, that's £6 million a month. So it's an ongoing project. We see that the veterans charity sector is a £1 billion sector. But I also see that if you go onto the Charity Commission website now and you type in the words veterans homelessness, you'll see that there's over 1,000 charities linked to it, which means 1,000 jobs, 2,000, maybe 3,000 jobs. So you're going to lose a lot of dedicated people to help the veterans community if you do end homelessness. It's a business.
A little bit galling, Trevor. I just wonder what your take on this is. So we've literally just reported, in fact, it broke minutes ago on this show, that the government has won a High Court battle to be able to house around 1,000 asylum seekers, mostly young men, in a former RAF base and government-owned sites in a small village somewhere. So they've gone to court to fight for their right to do that. Could they not do the same for these homeless military veterans? The UK funding here, this £8 million, is expected to provide services for over 900 housing places. It seems that we're doing that most days for people coming across the Channel.
Patrick, first of all, great question. And what I will respond is, quite a few years ago, I wrote to my local MP, Theresa Coffey, to find out why the then Defence Minister, Tobias Ellwood, wouldn't utilise an old military establishment to help homeless veterans. And I got a letter. I have a letter here from Tobias Ellwood and my own MP, Theresa Coffey, stating that the Ministry of Defence did not own any of the camps and they had been bought by private developers, which goes to show then that they weren't willing to use a disused military camp for veterans, but they are willing to use one for asylum seekers. We have a government which I don't think is serving the veterans as well as it should be.
No, I mean, clearly not. And the amount of fight that has had to go just to get this money, when you consider the amount of things that you guys have done for this country and the incredibly damaging effect, I mean, realistically, this £8 million is just a token amount of money to try to help make your lives better after the things that you've had to do on behalf of, as it was, Queen and now King and country. And I just wonder whether or not you feel as though we've got our priorities a bit skewed in this country.
Our priorities are all wrong. I will say that I'm really pleased that Johnny Mercer is able to do more things now. It's better him in there than out because he is dedicated. But £8 million, Why? You know, at the end of the day, help the heroes in the Royal British Legion have that money anyway. They've got 10 times that sitting in their account. So why all of a sudden are they saying they're going to help when they haven't actually achieved it in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years? It seems too little too late. Is it because there's an election coming up, maybe? Maybe they need veterans' votes? I don't know.
I think people can see through this, Trevor. I think the scale of the waste and other money going to some other sectors of society is so vast, and that £8 million now does not actually sound like a lot of money. I mean, don't get me wrong, it'd look massive if it was in my bank account, but £8 million in the grand scheme of things doesn't seem like a huge amount of money. Trevor, I'm going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, my good man, but thank you very much, as always. I'll chat to you soon. Trevor Cole, who is, of course, a recipient who was awarded the Military Cross, has served with absolute distinction our country on numerous different occasions. Now, wherever you look, there's a contrast there, isn't there? Wherever you look, people are protesting. Last Saturday, Animal Rising tried to disrupt the Grand National. They ended up being accused of causing a horse to die. A day later, Just Stop Oil decided that the World Snooker Championship was the best place to push their cause. And now, Extinction Rebellion have started 4 days of protest that they say will be supported by up to 50,000 people. I believe that we can go live now to Marianne van der Geer from Extinction Rebellion. Yes, good stuff. Who's at Westminster? Can you hear me, Marianne?
Yes, I can.
Good, we're off to a good start. Right, OK, so are you going to be there for the next 4 days? Why are you there?
Yes, I am going to be here for the next 4 days. I'm here, I'm with Extinction Rebellion. I'm here with my various groups that I'm working with, doing outreach, speaking to the people. But why I'm here on a personal level is because I'm extremely concerned about the climate and ecological emergency. I'm extremely concerned about the lack of action and the lack of a plan from this government. And I'm hoping that here, creating relationships, an alliance with all these different organisations, that we can work together to show the government we're here, we're concerned, we're willing to put in the work. Why aren't you? Let's get to work. Let's do something. Let's stop total catastrophe by not acting now.
OK, can I ask what more you want? Because it's very rare that this country actually does get to say with sincerity that we are a world leader and stuff. But we are a world leader when it comes to things like reducing carbon emissions. We are reducing CO2 emissions faster than any G20 in the world. What more do you want from us?
So the interesting thing is that a lot of the stuff that we consume, so the food that we eat, the things that we buy, aren't actually produced here in this country. So that's why it feels like we don't produce many emissions here on British soil. But the British consumers' stuff is coming from other countries in Asia and wherever. So the emissions aren't happening here, the emissions are happening abroad, but they're still down to us and the policies our government has and the things that we are doing.
On that, Marianne, I do have to ask you then, how do you react to a story that came out today about the leader of Extinction Rebellion, Gail Bradbuck, being spotted by a woman buying plastic packaged fruit that had travelled apparently thousands of miles from Chile, Vietnam, Spain, Cyprus, Italy, and also driving a diesel car? I mean, good grief, maybe you should be having a word with her.
What I will say about that article is that I was very impressed by the research that The Sun did in the carbon emissions of all those products, and I'm really glad that The Sun are exposing the carbon emissions of the stuff that we buy in our supermarkets, because...
He's a hypocrite. Is she a hypocrite?
I don't think she is a hypocrite. I have to go to the supermarket to buy my produce as well. I unfortunately don't have access to my own grown fruit and veg and things like that. So I also...
Do you have a diesel car?
I don't own a car, no. No, I don't own a car, I'm afraid.
Should she not get rid of it?
I'm a real Dutch girl.
No, that's great. Look, fantastic. But she could get rid of a diesel car, couldn't she?
Well, I think that this isn't really about individuals' acts. I think we're in a system where, as Gail said, she doesn't have access to public transport to get her boys to school and to their sports club. She has to drive them. She doesn't have the means to buy an expensive electric vehicle. So I think that is really what's at stake here, is that we're in a system where we as citizens who want to do good things aren't able to. So how can the government support us? How can the government help us be able to make decisions? How can they help us make sure that our supermarkets don't package everything in plastic? How can they help us that we can get a bus to school, that we can get a train to school, that we can walk or cycle, those sort of things? And we really, really ask for the government to please get help from us, the citizens. Everyone has ideas. Everybody's motivated. People want to do stuff. Let's sit around the table together. We're proposing a citizens' assembly, for example. Let's sit around the table together and make a plan. It could be really exciting. I wish the government was as excited about it as we are.
Okay.
And we just hope that they'll listen.
All right, Marianne, thank you very much. Marianne van der Geer there from Extinction Rebellion, who is at Westminster. I'm sorry, I find it incredibly hard to countenance how Extinction Rebellion can justify the fact that their leader drives a diesel car and, you know, buys all of that kind of usual stuff from the shops that's all wrapped in plastic and has been flown over from Chile, but then wants everyone else to do something different. Yeah. Anyway, a huge number of librarians are being told to censor or even take books off their shelves in what amounts to an attack on free speech. We are living, ladies and gentlemen, in 1984. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Channel. Britain
shocking research has revealed that 1/3 of UK librarians have been asked to either censor or remove books. The survey found that librarians are being asked to remove books based on things like empire, race, LGBTQ+ themes, with some librarians apparently facing threatening behaviour. But all is not quite as it seems with this story, and here to pick through it is the wonderful political commentator and director of Car 26. It is Lois Perry. Lois.
Hi.
What do you make of this? Because the idea now, for me, that a librarian would be told, can you remove this book because I find its references to the British Empire problematic, it's almost Orwellian, isn't it?
Well, it's completely Orwellian, and anyone who's read the book 1984 knows there's an entire department which is devoted to, cancelling out history and rewriting words and eliminating words. They call it newspeak because how can you have ideas if the words are actually removed from your vocabulary? You know, it's a similar thing. It really is. It's very dangerous, very dangerous.
It is. Now, this doesn't appear like any position of authority is telling the libraries that they should be doing this.
No.
It's more that people themselves are. And I think that's actually almost more concerning because it would imply that people have already been indoctrinated.
Yeah, but then it doesn't say how many, does it? I mean, it says there's a percentage of people that say that they've been asked, but they might have only been asked, for example, by one person for one particular title or something like that. But no, you're right. The fact that people are asking for books to be removed is very, very dangerous. And if we remove our history, we're doomed to repeat it.
So let me play devil's advocate here and say, what is the difference between someone who feels as though they've been oppressed by Britain's colonial history, walking into a library and saying, I want you to remove that book about the British Empire or the slave trade or something, and someone, let's say in Florida, walking in and saying, I want you to remove that book that tells my child that they might be transgender?
OK, well, there's two issues there. The one is anything to do with children, the parents should have the autonomy. I believe if it's anything to do with sexuality or anything to do with, medical intervention, for example. So I would say that's a slightly different argument. But my sister's mixed race, my stepfather's Jamaican, and so to go on to your other point, the last thing that they would want is for A, statues to be torn down, or for B, books to be removed from libraries, because they want people to know about what's happened, want people to learn from what's happened. Because if you eliminate history, as I just said before, there's that quote, sorry, I'm paraphrasing, those who don't understand or know history are doomed to repeat it. It's important that we know what happened so that we can make sure that things like that never happen again. Also, it's important for people to know that actually it was England, it was the United Kingdom that were at the forefront of actually ending the slave trade. Our naval ships actually devoted a lot of their time to actually stopping slave ships and stuff, especially in America and stuff like that. I mean, that's a different point. But no, the article in The Guardian is a bit disingenuous because what they're trying to do is conflate two completely separate things. You've got American parents who don't want their children to be given sexually explicit material or they want permission slips to be sent home. And then you've got other people who just don't want our history and culture to be talked about.
My concern will be that whether or not eventually libraries give in to them and they get rid of what will be considered problematic books, and despite the fact that some of those problematic books might just contain historical fact. Lois, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
As Lois Perry there, who is, of course, a wonderful political commentator, director of Car 26. So I was deeply concerned about this, and I wonder where this is going. I'm fearful of where this is going, because as we keep seeing in society, people do just cave into a bit of pressure, don't they? And if there is some pushback on certain books that are in there that are deemed to be, as I said, problematic, how long is it really until those are booted out of libraries? And that is sinister. Moving on. Dominic Raab has resigned as Deputy Prime Minister after a bullying inquiry. He has not gone quietly, though. He says his departure sets a dangerous precedent. I'm inclined to agree with him. What do you think? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Just gone 4 o'clock. Big hour. OK, so Dominic Raab has gone, but there's a lot of fallout to it. He's not gone quietly. I'm having a look at some of the reasons behind why he has resigned, his pushback to it, and I am asking, has he been biffed by a load of snowflakes? In other news as well, yes, OK, so are our veterans being let down yet again? It seems like a win for them. Oh, there's going to be £8 million for veterans issues. But hang on a minute, does that even scratch the surface? Why have we got 900 homes available across the country for veterans, but, as you're about to see in this next story, loads of different sites now available for other people coming across the channel? A verdict has been reached and the government has won its High Court case against Braintree District Council, who were complaining about the idea that around 1,000 asylum seekers could be plonked in their area. So why do we have the housing for one group of people and not for another group? And finally, yes, this one will get you going as well. Do you think that cyclists should have number plates? I certainly do, but the likes of Jeremy Vine, etc., are saying no, will not wear a number plate. Why not? OK, shouldn't it keep us all safer? Patrick Christys on GB News. OK, so was Raab biffed by snowflakes? GB Views at gbnews.uk. I want your take on that. I think it sets a very worrying precedent, doesn't it, for, frankly, conduct anywhere and what that might mean. I am also going to get your reaction to the fact that the government has now lost its High Court case, won its High Court case and will now be allowed to have people in Braintree as an asylum detention centre there. And as well, should cyclists have number plates? GB Views at gbnews.uk. Now, though, headlines with Aaron.
Good afternoon. It is 4:01. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Oliver Dowden has been appointed as the new Deputy Prime Minister following the resignation of Dominic Raab over bullying allegations. Mr Dowden will also remain in his role as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. And Alex Chalk has been announced as the new Justice Secretary. The MP for Cheltenham was a Defence Minister and a former barrister. Earlier, he was seen arriving at the Ministry of Defence. Well, the appointments come as a result of Dominic Raab resigning from the government after a bullying inquiry found he had acted in an intimidating and aggressive way towards staff. It's understood in one instance he criticised the work of civil servants as utterly useless. He was also found to have committed an abuse or misuse of power that undermined or humiliated officials. In his resignation letter, Mr Raab said, "In setting the threshold for bullying so low, this inquiry has set a dangerous precedent." He warned the Prime Minister it will encourage spurious complaints against ministers and have a chilling effect on those driving change on behalf of the government. In accepting Mr Raab's resignation, the Prime Minister agreed there were shortcomings in the historic process that had negatively affected everyone involved. Well, the Liberal Democrats are calling for a by-election in Dominic Raab's constituency of Esher and Walton, and the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has criticised Rishi Sunak over what he called indecision and weakness in allowing Mr Raab to resign.
Well, the big question for the Prime Minister is why he was so weak to appoint him in the first place. The second question for the Prime Minister is why he didn't sack him. And now it's left to Dominic Raab to resign, and the Prime Minister hasn't acted. And it's that indecision, it's that weakness, I think, that goes to the heart, not just of this Prime Minister, but of 13 years now of failure.
Conservative MP Julian Knight says he doesn't want the Tory whip reinstated and he won't stand again at the next general election. It's after police dropped a sexual assault allegation made against him. The MP for Solihull, who was suspended from the party over the claim, has always denied the allegation and has described it as false and malicious. He has tweeted to say it's brought untold damage to his physical and mental health, has caused pain and distress to his family. Braintree District Council has lost its High Court bid to stop the Weathersfield airfield in Essex being used to house asylum seekers. The government plans to accommodate as many as 1,700 migrants there for up to 6 months each. The judge said he didn't have the legal power to grant the council's application for an injunction. Two Just Stop Oil protesters, the 40-year-old Morgan Troland and 34-year-old Marcus Decker, who scaled a bridge over the Dartford crossing last October, have been jailed. The pair used ropes and other equipment to climb the QE2 bridge between Essex and Kent last year. The judge at Southend Crown Court said they had to be punished to deter others from copying them. They received 3 years and 2-year 7-month sentences, respectively. NatWest and John Lewis have joined the exodus of big businesses leaving the Confederation of British Industry. It follows a second allegation of rape made by a woman working for the business group, which was reported by The Guardian. That follows the departure of the insurance companies earlier, Phoenix Group and Aviva, both of them FTSE 100 companies. The CBI says it's working closely with the police to ensure perpetrators are brought to justice. The Unite Union has confirmed 1,300 offshore workers will stage a 48-hour strike from Monday. The walkout will affect oil and gas companies, including BP, Shell and Total. Unite's General Secretary Sharon Graham says they can easily afford to give staff a pay rise given their record profits. The union says strike action could result in production shutdowns. Ministers from the Ukraine Defence Contact Group are holding their fourth meeting. The US Secretary of State for Defence, Lloyd Austin, is hosting it. It's taking place at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. His UK counterpart, Ben Wallace, is also there. The NATO Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, says he expects Ukraine to eventually become a member of the alliance, but the priority is ensuring victory against Russia.
As important as discussing new platforms, it is extremely important to ensure that all the platforms which are already in Ukraine work and function as they should. Meaning that we need ammunition, we need spare parts, we need fuel, we need maintenance, we need repair.
And Kensington Palace has released a new photograph of the late Queen to mark what would have been her 97th birthday. It shows Queen Elizabeth with some of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, including Zara Tyndall's children on the left and Savannah Phillips seated on the right. The photo was taken by the Princess of Wales at Balmoral last summer, just weeks before the late Queen's death. This is GB News. More as it happens, as always. But for the moment, it's back to Patrick.
Only one place to start today, isn't there? And that is with Dominic Raab. He has resigned as Deputy Prime Minister after a bullying inquiry found that he had acted in an intimidating fashion with unreasonably and persistently aggressive conduct. But Raab did not go quietly. He says that his departure sets a dangerous precedent because it sets a low threshold for bullying, which will encourage spurious complaints. There is a lot to talk about here. Here to just give you the exact findings of this report and exactly what Dominic Raab has said since is Catherine Forster, our political reporter, on the steps of Downing Street. Catherine, thank you very much. So, was it just 2 of these complaints that were upheld? Talk us through it.
Yes, that's right. So there were 8 formal complaints made against Dominic Raab and a couple of dozen people that were involved in those complaints. Of all of those, only 2 of them were upheld. And although Dominic Raab has resigned, he stressed, he said, its 2 adverse findings are flawed and set a dangerous precedent for the conduct of good government. Now, he's resigned, but he's clearly angry and deeply unhappy about the way in which he feels that he's been treated. Now, Rishi Sunak, for his part, I think will be relieved that Dominic Raab chose to resign and that Rishi Sunak ultimately didn't have to sack him. Of course, they were great allies. Dominic Raab was a huge supporter of Rishi Sunak during both the leadership campaigns, stood by him even when it was clear that Liz Truss was going to win, and nevertheless said that putting Liz Truss in charge would be like putting a suicide vest on the Conservative Party. So obviously Rishi Sunak owes a huge debt of loyalty to him and was reluctant to see him go. But he had, of course, stood outside Downing Street and said that his government would have integrity, accountability and professionalism at its very heart. And so, because there were these 2 claims upheld of bad behaviour, of bullying, Dominic Raab had said he would resign if that was found to be the case. It was, and so he is gone, but not without a huge amount of ill feeling on his part and many questions now being asked about the civil service.
OK, yes, no, and just quickly, Catherine, he's been replaced quite quickly, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. He's been replaced as Justice Secretary by Alex Chalk, who was formerly a lawyer, came in 2015, was a Remainer, a backer of Rishi Sunak, and also Deputy Prime Minister, which of course Dominic Raab also had that role, replaced by Oliver Dowden, who is a really safe pair of hands, another big supporter of Rishi Sunak.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Thank you very much, Catherine. Catherine Forster there, outside the steps of Downing Street, and we'll be going back to Catherine as and when we get any more developments from that story. But it's a big story, this. It's not just big politically, OK? I think this does set a very concerning precedent that 2 out of 8 complaints can be upheld. It is important, again, to stress that for all of the talk about the kind of psychotic bully that Dominic Raab may have been, those reports that were coming out in the press leaked by, could it possibly have been civil servants? In the run-up to these findings, actually, he was found to have not once in 4.5 years sworn or shouted at anyone, and that now he's got to go. And a lot of this was based on people's feelings and feeling as though they might have been intimidated or belittled. And Dominic Raab doesn't deny the fact that if people turned up to meetings and they weren't properly briefed, that he was blunt with them. But this is a chap, is it not, who has got a massive job to do, who is publicly elected and has, frankly, to be held to account for his actions. And I can't help but wonder whether or not, when, as I'm about to go into, you do look at the culture in the civil service, this was always a problem waiting to happen when a demanding individual meets the snowflake generation. But what I want to ask today is just that. Do people need to toughen up? What counts as bullying? And is it just snowflakes who can't handle real life? Raab doesn't think he did anything wrong, and he says this whole episode has set a dangerous precedent where civil servants can now target ministers. He wrote this: in setting the threshold for bullying so low, this inquiry has set a dangerous precedent. It will encourage spurious complaints against ministers and have a chilling effect on those driving change on behalf of your government and ultimately the British people. Joining me now is Tim Smith, who actually is a former Australian MP, but also used to work with Dominic Raab. Now, Tim, talk me through your take on these findings and the fact that Raab has resigned.
Well, Patrick, it's a crying shame that Dominic Raab has resigned because he was a very good minister. He was a very competent minister. He's a very bright guy. And I worked with him when he was Chief of Staff to David Davis, when David Davis was Shadow Home Secretary. Now, frankly, this process, it's not just a kangaroo court, it's an insult to kangaroos. And I say that as an Australian, but I also say that as someone who has watched this process being played out in the media over the last 6 months. Let's be quite clear about this report. It's the word of a couple of public servants against that of the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. None of these witnesses were cross-examined. It says here
You've got the report in front of you.
I do. Sir Philip Barton told the Deputy Prime Minister in a private and informal meeting that he should not threaten officials with references to the Civil Service Code. The Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Raab, disputed that any such conversation had occurred.
But even if it had, sorry, just say that. Go on, carry on.
But if I could just make this point, because this is really important. Mr Tolley KC says, on this point, I prefer the evidence of Sir Philip.
Right.
So he prefers the word of a civil servant against Mr Raab, who denies it. And he loses his job. That's not fair. That's a rort of what was, deemed to be an independent review. I'm not sure that this review stands up to scrutiny, to be frank.
Well, we've got a couple of other excerpts from this, so I'm just going to bring them up now. So this is the definition of bullying as per this report, right? So legitimate, reasonable and constructive criticism of workers' performance will not amount to bullying. So they will not amount to bullying. So those are legitimate, reasonable and constructive criticisms. OK, again, that is subjective because what one person might think is legitimate, reasonable and constructive, another person, I think we can all agree, would see it as bullying. It defines bullying as intimidating or insulting behaviour that makes an individual feel uncomfortable, frightened, less respected or put down. So that's the definition. Now, if you really think about this at home, ladies and gentlemen, in your workplace right now, maybe even you, let's be honest, maybe even you, could that not potentially, if someone decided to, be spun against you? I also wanted to know, this is what I want your comment on now, Tim, is the way that this report was conducted, OK? So in terms of who was interviewed and how they were interviewed, so the people giving evidence against Dominic Raab, this is a quote from the report. I decided who should be interviewed. I conducted all of the interviews myself. If, and to the extent appropriate, I sought to test the accounts provided, although I did not conduct what might be regarded as a cross-examination. It goes on to talk about the fact that they were also given union representation and just someone there for support, if needed. What do you make of that, Tim? Because it appears to me that people were allowed to just go and make claims, and that wasn't really massively scrutinised.
Was Dominic Raab provided with procedural fairness? I don't think he was. I mean, Dominic Raab, I worked with him. Dominic Raab is tough, but Dominic Raab is fair. And I don't think Dominic Raab has been afforded procedural fairness in this case. If Dominic Raab was an employee of the Department of Justice, he may well have an unfair dismissal claim against the Department of Justice. But as the Secretary of State, the rules don't apply to him. And that's why I think this process is so fundamentally unfair, that you've got a couple of allegations by a couple of unnamed public servants being alleged against Dominic Raab, and he's now lost his job. I think this process stinks.
Well, you know Dominic Raab. Let me just read out another element of this report now. And so this is almost like what would you say, a character definition of Dominic Raab. So this is in the report. The Deputy Prime Minister's style is, in his own words, inquisitorial, direct, impatient and fastidious. Do you think that describes Dominic Raab? And if that does describe Dominic Raab, do you not think that might be a good thing?
That absolutely describes Dominic Raab. He's a very hard worker. He's a very hard taskmaster. But you want that. When you're the Deputy Prime Minister of a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, a nuclear power, the 6th largest economy in the world, you want your Deputy Prime Minister to be fastidious. You do. So what is the message this now sends to all cabinet ministers in the United Kingdom or all future cabinet ministers in the United Kingdom? Well, it means don't be too harsh on a public servant, on a civil servant, because they might leak against you in the media and you might lose your job. Yeah. This is really bad for democracy in Britain.
I'm not surprised. I'm just going to read one more thing now. You've alluded to this. So this is another quote from the report. At no stage prior to the investigation did anyone communicate to the Deputy Prime Minister in terms that his conduct in relation to civil servants was or might amount to a form of bullying, in that there was no evidence that the word bullying was ever used in any communication to him. So at no point in 4.5 years did anyone ever, according to this report, say to Dominic Raab, even just as a tap on the shoulder, look, do you want to check yourself a bit here, because we could nip this in the bud by apologising to that person and then you're not behaving like this going forward. So that, to me, appears to be a little bit odd.
Well, the precious petals in the Whitehall departments that have made these complaints can't have it both ways. At the same time that they have essentially gone and had a sook behind the minister's back, they didn't have the decency or indeed the guts to confront him and say, I don't like the way you've spoken to me. So what does it say about the culture within the civil service? They're either gutless or there's a political agenda here, and I think there's a political agenda. Well, because Dominic Raab was an ardent Brexiteer from the outset, and we all know what the blob thinks of Brexit.
I put this to the head or the General Secretary of the Civil Service Union earlier on in this show, and we'll play a clip of that interview later on, actually. But I put it to him that you look at the people who've had big trouble with the civil service in recent years. We've got Priti Patel, we've got Suella Braverman, we've had Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we've got Dominic Raab. And is there not really here a clear distinction between people who were elected to enact, quote-unquote, proper conservative policies and ideology, who have managed to fall foul of a civil service, who, it would appear to me, given that they run regular courses on things like microaggressions, leading without authority, one official has come out and said that they have to spend a fifth of their time, right, a fifth of their corporate objective, working on corporate identity networks, which include things like going to gender non-conforming book clubs and a non-binary awareness week. And it does lead one to at least accept the possible conclusion that maybe there is a culture clash going on here. And who is the big loser there? Is it not the British public? Thank you very much, Tim. Great to have you on at the show, as ever. That's fantastic stuff. Right, OK, look, did Dominic Raab, though, deserve to lose his job over this? Let's get a legal take on this story now and go to speak to Rustam Tatar, who is the chairman and the head of employment for the law firm DMH Stallard. Rustam, thank you very much. Now, I do want to put this to you. Dominic Raab is saying that he's had trial by media, so things, erroneous things were leaked out to the press for months before this. The HR guidance didn't apply to him, so no claims, he says, were put to him in writing. He says that he was told in person 4 times that he had a clean bill of health and that he only found out that there might not be everything rosy in the garden through informal tip-offs. If that was you or I, would we not maybe be looking at this now and thinking, is this unfair dismissal?
Well, good afternoon. I think that the fundamental issue here is that these sorts of complaints tend to sit and fester over a period of time. So whilst in an ideal world, one might say that as soon as something happens that an individual doesn't like, or maybe which is inappropriate by way of behaviour, is raised immediately and dealt with immediately. Unfortunately, my experience of many different workplaces is that it just doesn't happen like that. I think that's in a sense underpinning this point. I think it's probably only fair in the context of the report, which I have here as well.
Yeah.
Your headline-grabbing piece about snowflakes. It says there, the DPM, Mr. Raab, did not at any time suggest that any of the complaints were derived from a so-called snowflake quality or allege any of the individuals should be so regarded. What he did then go on to say, as reflected in the report, is it is a clash, or is a tension, perhaps, between a certain style of management and operation and perhaps where we've come to and what we expect for ourselves and for our families if we feel we're at the wrong end of things. So I think it's just which end of the telescope you look at this from.
I just wonder if, at the moment, there is too much emphasis put on subjective feelings, OK? So I completely admit that, you know, in the kind of industry that I operate in here, and no doubt you yourself as well, there can be very firm and frank exchanges of words under very highly pressurised, high-tempo situations, and people can be very blunt with each other. And that's not always OK, and that's not always that nice. And, you know, I accept that. I've done that in the past numerous times, OK, and people have done it to me. Is it really, though, fair to say that if somebody just feels a bit uncomfortable or belittled, just feels a bit uncomfortable and belittled, that is enough for somebody to have to resign over from a role as significant as Deputy Prime Minister?
I think individuals, and dare I say it, politicians more than anyone, will take a calculated decision about whether to resign or whether to tough it out. Obviously, the Deputy Prime Minister, former Deputy Prime Minister, took the view to tough it out to a point and has now decided to resign. I think from a general legal point of view, what hasn't been tested is, given the findings of Adam Tolley KC, whether or not the Prime Minister would have taken the view that the behaviour as found was such as should mean that he should determine that the minister should no longer continue in post. And there is obviously that fundamental difference that a minister effectively serves at the discretion of the Prime Minister. It is not employment. It is not subject to employment rights, as you flagged to earlier, and it's not subject to employment tribunal regulation. So there is a difference. I take your point that, you know, through one lens, he was a tough guy, strong views, wanted to push through certain reforms, civil servants not doing what he wanted. I mean, the finding was that he probably was abrasive rather than abusive.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of probably fair to put. But, you know, in the not so recent past, you know, there have been other very senior politicians going against perhaps what officials might have suggested and recommended, and that hasn't necessarily always helped us as a country.
Look, yeah, Rustam, thank you very, very much. Much appreciated, as ever. Rustam Tartar, who's the chairman and head of employment at law firm DMH Stellar. Great to get that insight there. Look, there is a key point of difference there, isn't there, between, frankly, normal employment, I think, and politics. But I tell you what, Oliver Dowden's got his work cut out now, because the next time he goes into a meeting and he finds out that civil servants who have spent a huge amount of time at some kind of wellness retreat and indeed maybe thinking about how they can get the next £200,000 a year job focused on social mobility within a department, haven't actually done the research that they were supposed to have done on the briefing that he's given them on a massive issue that affects the country and that the Tories were voted in on. He better not raise his voice, because if he does, he'll be straight out the door, won't he? GB Views at gbnews.uk. Loads more on that story throughout the day, but now to another top story for us, and that is that up to £8 million has been made available to tackle the issue of homelessness among armed forces veterans. Charities and other organisations can bid for cash to provide accommodation and other support for people who fought for this country, but have now fallen on hard times. There are thousands of homeless veterans in the UK, and this £8 million apparently will only go to housing around 900 of them. I'm just not sure whether or not this is even less than a token effort. Joining me now is Lieutenant General Sir Andrew Gregory. Thank you very much for joining me. What's your initial take on this £8 million?
It's good news. All money is to be greatly welcomed. I think there is a challenge because at the moment the armed forces are not in the public eye. Thankfully, we haven't got an Iraq or Afghanistan with people coming back killed or wounded, and the public's priority is elsewhere. But supporting veterans through organisations like SAFA is critical. We are supporting Falklands veterans, Northern Ireland veterans, and of course veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. So
why is it not more money? Why is it, with respect, why is it not more money? Because this has taken a long time to come about. In the meantime, we have around 6,000 to 7,000 homeless veterans at a Conservative estimate, and we do have the money for around £7 million a day for asylum seeker hotels.
Well, I think the government has got to balance its priorities. Listen, I wouldn't want to turn down any money. It's good news. I also think that in Johnny Mercer, as the Minister for Veterans Affairs, we have a real champion, a genuine champion who sits at the cabinet table and makes sure government remembers veterans. So last year during the budget, the government produced 20 million for veterans' mental health. There is a steady flow of money coming from government to support these initiatives. And that is good. And charities like SAFA, the Armed Forces Charity, can work with the Office of Veterans Affairs and government to make a difference for these people.
OK. Why is it only 900 places supposedly available for housing? I mean, we've just seen literally moments ago, the government won a High Court battle to put around 1,000 people in and I believe, a former military base in Braintree, for goodness sake. I mean, so now here's 8 million quid to give 900 homeless military veterans, quite possibly with other issues as well, other than being homeless, housing. I just find that odd.
South and other military charities can use that money sensibly. So homelessness is but one of the challenges facing veterans. And what we can do with this money and other money is to make sure that collectively we are helping these people who've served the country thrive. Determining exactly how many veterans are homeless is a real challenge. You quoted a figure. I'm not sure whether that is right or wrong. But what we want to do is reach out to these individuals, make sure that they come for help, because so often they're too proud to ask for help. They've served in the military. They don't want to be seen as failures. And actually, I'd urge them to come to SAFA and other military charities, say, hey, life isn't great. And then we can use 8 million quid to really good effect. We can make a difference with that money.
OK, thank you very, very much for joining me. Great stuff. Lieutenant General Sir Andrew Gregory there reacting to the news that veterans are going to get around £8 million of funding. Look, I'm going to ask you the same questions I was asking him, really. Do you think that is enough money? Are you amazed that this is being hailed as some kind of victory? I get that any money is good money, don't knock it, but 900 housing places across the UK? Well, we've got around 46,000 asylum seekers, channel migrants in hotels at the minute. I find that bizarre, really, when you consider how easy it is to house some people and not others, people who have fought and given their limbs and their mental health for this country and their family lives. Is that not a slight shift in our priorities there, maybe? But moving on. Extinction Rebellion are at it again, yes. The group says that up to 50,000 people will take part in 4 days of protests in London. We are at those protests. We're speaking to them. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Afternoon, welcome back. Loads more coming your way between now and 5 o'clock. This broke just moments ago. Braintree District Council has lost a High Court bid to prevent the government housing asylum seekers at Wethersfield Airfield in Essex. So that is going to go ahead now. And does that not stick in the craw when we look at my previous story that the government is apparently finding 900 spaces across the whole of the UK for homeless military veterans? Bit of a difference there, isn't there? I will be asking you, is this another escalation of the never-ending war between drivers and cyclists? Should cyclists be made to present number plates on their bikes or their backs? Jeremy Vine predictably has said no, which makes me want to say yes. Right now, though, it's your headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Hi there, it is 4:33. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Oliver Dowden's been appointed as the new Deputy Prime Minister following the resignation of Dominic Raab over bullying allegations. Mr Dowden will also remain in his role as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. And Alex Chalk has been announced as the new Justice Secretary in place of Raab. The MP for Cheltenham was a Defence Minister and a former barrister, and earlier he was seen arriving at the Ministry of Justice. The appointments follow Dominic Raab's resignation from government. A bullying inquiry found he acted in an intimidating and aggressive way towards staff. It's understood in one instance he criticised the work of civil servants as utterly useless. He was also found to have committed an abuse or misuse of power that undermined or humiliated officials. Braintree District Council has lost its High Court bid to stop a former RAF base in Essex being used to house asylum seekers. The government plans to accommodate as many as 1,700 migrants at Wethersfield Airfield for up to 6 months each. The judge said he did not have the legal power to grant the council's application for an injunction. And 2 Just Stop Oil protesters who scaled a bridge over the Dartford crossing last October have been jailed. 40-year-old Morgan Troland and 34-year-old Marcus Decker used ropes and other equipment to climb the QE2 bridge between Essex and Kent. The judge said they had to be punished to deter others from copying. The pair received 3-year sentences and 2 years and 7 months, respectively. Finally, Kensington Palace has released a new photo of the late Queen to mark what would have been her 97th birthday. It shows Queen Elizabeth with some of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, including Zara Tyndall's kids on the left and Savannah Phillips seated on the right. The photo was taken by the Princess of Wales at Balmoral last summer, months before the late Queen's death. TV, online, DAB and TuneIn Radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
Those coming your way. The government wins a court case, doesn't it, to be able to house migrants in the Braintree area. That is controversial. I'll be talking about that. Tell you what, something else that's proving controversial in the inbox anyway is whether or not cyclists should be made to present number plates. I'll be getting stuck right into that. But wherever you look, it's talking to people who cycle everywhere. Or don't, in the case of Extinction Rebellion's leader, actually. She drives a diesel car. Why? Oh, well, because it would be too expensive for her to get an electric car. Yeah. OK. Anyway, people are protesting. Last Saturday, Animal Rising tried to disrupt the Grand National and ended up being accused of causing a horse to die. A day later, Just Stop Oil decided that the World Snooker Championship was the best place to push their cause. And now, Extinction Rebellion have started 4 days of protest that they say will be supported by up to 50,000 people. Let's go live now to GB News' London reporter, Lisa Hartle. Lisa, you've been in amongst it. What's going on?
Yeah, we've been here since this morning. So obviously when we got here this morning, it was raining. There weren't many people around, but as you can see now around me and behind me, the streets are filled with people. But the atmosphere, I mean, I've never been to another Extinction Rebellion protest before, but obviously I've seen them all on the news, and they were very much different to this one. Just half an hour ago on the stage down there where we've had speakers throughout the day, they were playing like meditative music, like whale sounds and everything, so it's very relaxing. There's children here. It's a very calm, peaceful protest, which is obviously what their agenda was this time. They said they didn't want to exclude people by having that disruption that they've had in the past. They wanted this to be an event where all the different speakers that they've had outside the 16 government buildings around the city, they wanted people to be able to come up to them, listen to the talks that were happening and get involved with what was being said.
And Lisa, there was talk of there being 50,000 protesters there. Is there anything like that number?
That's so hard to quantify because obviously it's all in 50,000. I mean, every area we've been to, they've been full of people and crowds, whether it's been live music or people speaking. You know, there's obviously not just Extinction Rebellion, there's 200 other environmental organisations that have also come along to support these today and the next 3 days. So, that could have been the case, but it's very difficult when you're here to try and count up the numbers. I spoke to someone from Extinction Rebellion earlier, and he was telling me why he decided to join the organisation.
Protecting the London Marathon rather than disrupting the London Marathon. And I think Extinction Rebellion is quite unequivocal in that we will protect it from other organizations trying to look for trouble as well. I don't see it happening because everybody who joins the big one joins it on that premise that we're not going to be disrupting the public on this time around.
So this is obviously the first day. There's 3 more days ahead of this. On Monday, they intend to do a similar day like they have done today, where they'll picket outside each of the 16 government organisations. The next 2 days, tomorrow is supposed to be a march, which is, again, inclusive with families and children. And then on Sunday, that's to coexist with the London Marathon, which, of course, they've assured that there will be no disruptions. They've all signed a unity agreement, which is what they've called it, to ensure that that won't be the case. Because obviously 40,000 runners that have been raising money for months, millions of pounds for charity. So they're hoping for 4 days of a peaceful protest where they can explain what their message is and hopefully get people to listen, they say.
Yeah, all right, Lisa, thank you very much. Lisa Hartle there, who is our London reporter, who's been in the thick of the Extinction Rebellion protest for us all day. It was nice to hear the views there of Bosch, wasn't it, about the reasons why people are joining Extinction Rebellion. I just can't help but wonder how they do respond, though, and how they hold their heads up when it turns out that their leader, Gail Bradbuck, has been found driving a diesel car and shopping. Can you guess where? At Waitrose, yeah. Shopping at Waitrose and buying all this pre-packaged long-distance fruit and stuff. Does it not feel as though it's one rule for them and one rule for the rest of us, you know? They want us all to go and get electric cars. They want us all to do more to do all of these eco-friendly things. And meanwhile, you've got this lady who decides not to get, allegedly anyway, an electric car because it will be too expensive and she needs to take her kids to football. All right, well, aren't these the kind of infringements that you're asking us to make on our lives? But there we go. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Now, should cyclists have to put number plates on their bikes? That's what one lawyer is calling for. Nick Freeman says that pedestrians can struggle to get redress if a cyclist does indeed crash into them. And the main reason for that, of course, is because they've got no idea who this individual is. And despite what the cycling community may say, the reality is that not all of them stop, do they? So he suggested that some sort of identification may help. I am joined now by Casper Hughes from Stop Killing Cyclists. So, Casper, thank you very much. So, would you cycle around with a number plate on?
No, I wouldn't cycle around with a number plate on.
Why?
Well, for a simple reason that we want as many people as possible to be cycling. It's transport is for many reasons. Transport is the largest polluting and the largest emitting sector in the UK, and we need to get people out of their cars. And one very healthy way to do that is to get them to cycle their short journeys instead.
But then it doesn't stop people getting a bike and cycling, does it? They just also need to get a number plate, and that might mean that when they do hit someone, even if it's the pedestrian's fault, Casper, or even if it's the driver's fault, whatever, that cyclist can be identified. I mean, I do have to put it to you, why would you not want to have a number plate on unless you didn't want to be identified?
But I mean, this is a bit of a crazy argument, Patrick, because on the pavements, 99.6% of fatalities and injuries on the pavements are caused by drivers. And
they've got number plates.
Held to account, despite the fact they've got a number plate.
All right, but I mean, why not just for the sake of safety, even if it makes, you know, one person feel better about themselves for getting injured at the hands of a cyclist? I mean, why willfully oppose the idea of having some form of identification? I mean, what are you trying to get away with?
That one person who would probably be pleased by this is Kim Jong-il, because the only country on the globe that has got registration plates on their bikes is North Korea. Why would we be looking to change our policy to become the only other country in line with North Korea?
Yeah, I mean, Kim Jong-il, of course, did die in 2011, but I do take your point there. I mean, is putting a number plate on a bike that would mean that if it hit and killed a pedestrian, or if it skipped a red light, or if it was speeding, or if it did something wrong and therefore made it easier for people to find out the identification of that person, you think that would make us North Korea?
No, I think I would look at it slightly differently. Do you want to see registration numbers on people cycling to reduce the injuries that we have on the roads and the pavements? Is that,
I don't
or do you
think
want
it's going to
reduce for them to be
I
accountable?
don't think a number plate is in itself going to reduce it. What I refuse to believe, Casper, that you do not understand the point of what I'm asking here, and I do wonder why you're not just answering the question directly. I mean, what would be the problem with cyclists having a number plate on so that if there is, unfortunately, an accident and that cyclist does decide to leave the scene, that there's more chance that they might be held to account for breaking the law? Why would you oppose that?
Well, I can answer that directly again if you want, and you know, the answer is, why would you create an additional barrier to people cycling when we know full well that having more people cycling and less people driving has net worth for society and actually reduces the injuries and deaths on the road?
Do you not have a public duty, though? You know, I mean, if anyone's got a public duty to cyclists, you know, drivers have to, you know, abide by the cycle lanes. I know that you're going to say not all of them do, and that's fair enough. Not a lot of them do. A lot of drivers are terrible towards cyclists. A lot of pedestrians are careless when it comes to cyclists. I am not disputing that at all. But what I am also saying is that a lot of cyclists are an absolute nightmare as well, and people have to go out of their way for them. So why can't they just do the common courtesy that other road users do? Drivers who pay road tax, for example, as well, bear in mind, that they have to make allowances.
Because road tax hasn't existed since 1938, but that's cool.
Right, you pay to tax your car, you get what I mean, right? So you pay to tax your car, you have to do all of this stuff for your car.
You pay a tax on the emissions of your vehicle, yes. And obviously, if you own an electric vehicle, you don't pay tax.
Right. OK, so why wouldn't you just, for the sake of general safety and ease, have a number plate on the back of your car? It does make it look a little bit, I think, like you want to get away with hitting a person and then cycling off.
No, of course you don't want to get away with hitting a person and cycling off. But talking of hitting people and driving off, that happens daily. 5 people are killed every single day by drivers. Yes. And, you know, they are registered and they are insured. I will always approach these conversations with a view to how can we reduce the injuries and deaths on the road, and you know, creating an additional barrier and the extra cost and administration of forcibly requiring everybody cycling, including children, to have registration numbers isn't a way to do that. That is a way to push people into cars, not attract people out of cars. OK, it's just, I just find there's a fatal flaw in what you're saying here, if you excuse the pun, just based around the fact that by someone who already owns the bike, right, just getting a number plate put on it, as opposed to you're thinking that would make them more likely to go out of their way to buy a car at greater expense, to get insurance on that car, to get whatever that car needs in order for it to be roadworthy. You think simply by putting a number plate on the back of a bicycle, that would make people more that would be so much effort for them that they would then have to go to all of the efforts just getting a car. Really? But it's not just simply putting a number plate on a bike. I mean, you know that. You own a car, don't you? I'm guessing. You know full well that it's not. You don't just go and buy a registration number and put it on a car. There's the whole process of registering your car, isn't there?
So they're lazy.
You know, that's what there's cost, there's administration. All of these are additional barriers to people cycling. How are you going to administer this for kids? You know, 7-year-olds cycling to school.
Yeah, well, presumably you have a number plate on them as well.
And who's going to pay that cost?
Well, the parents, I would imagine. Who bought them the bike?
Why?
Well, who bought them the bike? Yeah, that's ridiculous.
So the additional cost is yet another barrier to people cycling.
Okay,
and we need to get more people cycling because it benefits society.
Okay, Casper. All right, thank you very much. Casper Hughes there from Stop Killing Cyclists. Not giving an inch.
Thank you.
Anyway, right. Dominic Raab has resigned as Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister. That would be a story, wouldn't it? After a bullying inquiry. He's not gone quietly, though. He says that his departure sets a dangerous precedent. He has spoken to GB News, so I just want to reiterate this. We can break this to you now. He has spoken to GB News following this, and you can watch that here just after 5 o'clock. So stay tuned. Make sure that you don't move or anything. Right after 5 o'clock, you, ladies and gentlemen, will be hearing from Dominic Raab right here on this show. The government also, in other news, has won a High Court battle with a council that wanted to stop migrants being housed at an RAF airbase. I'm Patrick, Christys on GB News, and we are Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join us here.
Welcome back. Dominic Raab has resigned as Deputy Prime Minister after a bullying inquiry, and there has been a monumental fallout after that. I can now confirm to you that he has spoken to GB News following this, and you'll be able to watch that right here in just a few minutes on GB News. So stay where you are. We will bring Dominic Raab to you, former Deputy Prime Minister, in the wake of his resignation earlier on. But before that, it is a significant day in the government's battle to get control of the migrant crisis. Braintree District Council has lost a High Court bid to prevent the government housing asylum seekers in Wethersfield Airfield in Essex. Joining me now is GB News' Home and Security Editor Mark White, who's been all over this from the very start. Mark, thank you very much. Well, a massively significant day, not just for the people of the Braintree area, but frankly, probably for the UK as a whole.
Yes, there's no doubt that this whole issue of where to house these growing numbers of asylum seekers coming across the English Channel is something that the government views as a top priority when they, in fact, have said through their own government lawyer earlier this week that they are expecting another 56,000 people coming across the Channel on small boats in the year ahead. And combined with those already in hotel and other accommodation, that is going to mean somewhere between 120 and 140,000 homes and hotel rooms, other supported accommodation will be required for these people. So one of the solutions was to use the land that they already have, Crown land, the likes of Ministry of Defence bases, former and present. Now, one, of course, as we just mentioned, is at Wethersfield, near the town of Braintree. That's what this court battle was about. Braintree District Council saying that the government never sought any kind of planning permission for this, therefore is in breach of those planning laws, and they wanted the High Court to grant an injunction. After hearing the evidence, the judge in this case said that he simply doesn't have the powers to grant that injunction on this issue, and he has ruled in favour of the Home Office. However, he has said to Braintree District Council that they do have a right of appeal if they so choose. Braintree District Council haven't said yet whether they will indeed decide to appeal this and take further legal action, Patrick.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you very, very much. Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor, who's bringing you the latest there on that court case. And it is significant, really, isn't it? Because Braintree District Council were, I think, trying to set a precedent that if there is massive public backlash and economic backlash and public health and safety backlash to a government site being used to house asylum seekers, potentially in excess of 1,000 of them as well, surely something could be done about that. And the answer to that would appear to be no. And so whilst it's bad news for them, if that was a test case, then it is indeed going to be a test case in your area and probably one that, unfortunately, you will lose. That news broke on the same day, of course, that we brought to you that the government is being able to find only around 900 houses for veterans with an £8 million pot. So it can spend however much money it's spending every single day, 7 million or so, on people that have just arrived over the Channel. But no, of course, when it comes to our veterans, people who fought and in some cases suffered catastrophic injuries for Queen and now King and Country, then they essentially are left to languish. We don't have the money for them. Just a quick tease ahead, because I am going to be bringing to you Dominic Raab right here on this show. Dominic Raab spoke to GB News, and we have now managed to get that together for you so we can show you that. So if you stay exactly where you are, I will be bringing you Dominic Raab very, very shortly. And he'll get all of his reaction, won't we, to the fact that he's had to resign or has resigned indeed. And again, I just want to emphasise to you, he said, I had not once in 4.5 years sworn or shouted at anyone. Just 2 of the 8 complaints levied against him were upheld. And those included things like people essentially feeling as though they were belittled and intimidated. Dominic Raab, of course, just saying, I was simply asking people to do their jobs in quite a forthright manner. Is he the victim of snowflake culture? He's not held back, and he won't hold back right here on GB News very, very shortly. But it's now time for a little feature I'm calling Patrick's Pick of the Day, where I bring you a quick story that has caught my eye. Sometimes it makes me laugh, other times I'm shocked. I just thought I'd squeeze this one in today. Today I am bringing you a story from cinema. And it seems that Peter Pan is the latest victim of the woke brigade. That's right. So Disney's new Peter Pan adaptation will feature a troupe of lost girls alongside the boy who never grows up. So yes, even fairy tales are no longer safe from Hollywood's requirements of diverse casting and woke messaging. What next? Tinkerbell played by a bloke in a dress? I mean, stranger things have happened, to be fair. I do also want to point out that apparently in the original story, Peter Pan told Wendy that girls were far too clever to be lost boys. But now apparently they've actually simultaneously tried to go woke and make girls thick. So not necessarily the best look there. Moving on, though, yes, that teaser ahead. Dominic Raab will be live here on this show very, very shortly. Patrick Christys, GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. And wow, do I have a top of the show for you, ladies and gentlemen, because we will be hearing from Dominic Raab this hour. He's done a big interview with GB News, and I'll be playing that to you exclusively on this show in just a matter of moments. So you can hear from Raab, who, of course, resigned in very controversial fashion as Deputy Prime Minister after some, I think we can maybe all agree, quite spurious bullying allegations. He's not held back in his response to that previously. He will not be holding back right here on this show in a few minutes' time. In other news, though, yes, OK, so veterans. Are our veterans being let down? On paper, a new £8 million fund for them to get some housing sounds great for veterans who've fallen on hard times. But look at the amount of money that we are spending every single day housing people who've just made their way across the Channel. In fact, the government has just won a High Court case to be able to plonk around 1,000 of them in Braintree, for goodness sake. Could they not be doing the same for our dear veterans? And finally, as well, a big day of protests taking place at the moment in central London. This is based around Extinction Rebellion. I am, however, going to be having a Just Stop Oil character in the studio very shortly. And we're going to have a chat about the fact that 2 of them, of course, have been done for hoisting themselves up a bridge and remaining there whilst doing their best to save the planet. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Don't miss this Raab interview. OK, so that inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Don't forget as well, I was talking about whether or not cyclists should be made to use number plates. That has got a lot of reaction in the inbox so far. Do you think they should? And, of course, yes, like I've said, Dominic Raab live on this show very, very shortly. Patrick Christys, GB News.
Good afternoon, I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom at 5:05. Let's get you up to date with the headlines. Oliver Dowden has been appointed as the new Deputy Prime Minister following the resignation of Dominic Raab over bullying allegations. Mr Dowden says he's deeply honoured to take the role and looks forward to tackling the issues that matter most to the people of this country. He'll remain in his role as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster as well. Meanwhile, replacing Mr Raab as Justice Secretary is Alex Chalk, making him the 11th person appointed to that role since 2010. The MP for Cheltenham has held positions as a Defence Minister, a barrister and a former Solicitor General. The Law Society warns that he inherits an even worse justice crisis than any of his predecessors. The appointments follow Dominic Raab's resignation from government after a bullying inquiry found he'd acted in an intimidating and aggressive way towards staff. It's understood in one instance he criticised the work of civil servants as utterly useless. He was also found to have committed an abuse or misuse of power that undermined or humiliated officials. Mr Raab says labelling these actions as bullying could have a negative influence on ministers' work.
I'm very confident that I didn't behave in a bullying way. Most of these allegations were dismissed out of hand. Being able to pull very senior civil servants, not junior members of staff, up and say, look, I don't have the basic information to decide this. That was one of the things on which I was found to have been bullying because I defended someone, or because I said in relation to human rights reform, to get more foreign national offenders removed from this country, to strengthen free speech, I said I thought the department were being obstructive. If these kind of things amount to bullying, then I think it puts a handbrake, a paralysing effect on ministers.
Well, plenty more from that interview coming up this hour. Meanwhile, in his resignation letter, Mr Raab said this: in setting the threshold for bullying so low, this inquiry has set a dangerous precedent. And he warned the Prime Minister it will encourage spurious complaints against ministers and have a chilling effect on those driving change on behalf of the government. Accepting Mr Raab's resignation, Rishi Sunak agreed there were shortcomings in the historic process that had negatively affected everyone involved. Well, the Liberal Democrats are calling for a by-election in Raab's constituency of Esher and Walton, and the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has criticised the Prime Minister over what he's called indecision and weakness in allowing Mr Raab to resign.
Well, the big question for the Prime Minister is why he was so weak to appoint him in the first place. The second question for the Prime Minister is why he didn't sack him. And now it's left to Dominic Raab to resign, and the Prime Minister hasn't acted. And it's that indecision, it's that weakness, I think, that goes to the heart, not just of this Prime Minister, but of 13 years now of failure.
In other news this afternoon, two Just Stop Oil protesters who scaled a bridge over the Dartford crossing last October have been jailed. Morgan Troland has been sentenced to 3 years and Marcus Decker 2 years and 7 months for causing a public nuisance. The pair argued it was a peaceful protest, but the judge disagreed, saying they deserved to be punished for causing chaos and also to stop other people copying them. Braintree District Council's lost its High Court bid to stop the Weathersfield airfield in Essex being used to house asylum seekers. The government plans to accommodate as many as 1,700 migrants there for up to 6 months each. The judge said he didn't have the legal power to grant the council's application for an injunction. Now, the Confederation of British Industry's future is in doubt as further major UK companies have quit today following a second rape allegation from a woman working for the business group. NatWest and John Lewis have joined other big businesses, including BMW and Virgin Media O2, in cancelling their involvement with the crisis hit group. The Guardian reports the alleged victim claims she was raped by 2 male colleagues. The CBI says it's working closely with police to ensure perpetrators are brought to justice. Conservative MP Julian Knight says he doesn't want the Tory whip reinstated and he won't be standing again at the next general election. It comes after police dropped a sexual assault allegation made against him. The MP for Solihull, who was suspended from the party over the claim, has always denied the allegation describing it as false and malicious. He's tweeted to say it has brought untold damage to his physical and mental health and has caused pain and distress to his family. The Unite Union has confirmed 1,300 offshore workers will stage a 48-hour strike from Monday. The walkout will affect oil and gas companies, including BP, Shell and Total. Unite's General Secretary Sharon Graham says they can easily afford to give staff a pay rise given their record profits. The union says strike action could result in production shutdowns. And Kensington Palace has released a new photo of the late Queen to mark what would have been her 97th birthday. It shows Queen Elizabeth with some of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, including Zara Tyndall's children on the left and Savannah Phillips seated on the right. The photo was taken by the Princess of Wales at Balmoral last summer, just weeks before the late Queen's death. This is GB News. More as it happens. Now it's over to Patrick.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we start with our interview with Dominic Raab. He spoke to GB News just a few hours after he resigned following an inquiry into alleged bullying. The former Deputy Prime Minister has sat down with GB News' political reporter Olivia Utley. We can bring you this exclusive interview right now.
Thank you so much, Mr Raab, for coming to talk to us today. And, of course, it's been quite a day for all of us, most particularly you. Can I first ask, how do you define a bully?
I don't think it is for me to define it, but look, I'm very confident that I didn't behave in a bullying way. Most of these allegations were dismissed out of hand, and I think people watching this will be surprised that in scrutinising civil servants, in making sure that millions of pounds of taxpayers' money is not squandered, being able to pull very senior civil servants, not junior members of staff, up and say, look, I don't have the basic information to decide this. That was one of the things on which I was found to have been bullying because I defended someone, or because I said in relation to human rights reform, to get more foreign national offenders removed from this country, to strengthen free speech, I said I thought the department were being obstructive. If these kind of things amount to bullying, then I think it puts a handbrake, a paralysing effect on ministers delivering for the British people, and that can't be right.
Do you think, essentially, that the allegations were purely political, or do you think people genuinely felt threatened by you?
It's difficult to say, but the way my behaviour was characterised is interesting. Adam Toddie KC, a very experienced barrister who conducted this investigation, found I'd never lost my temper, never over 4.5 years shouted or swore at anyone, but that some people found my direct style of probing, of interrogating, of scrutiny unsettling or discomforting or even offensive. And I think there's a certain tyranny of subjective hurt feelings here, which, if you actually apply that across the board, means that senior ministers are at risk as they try and drive forward the change that the British public expect, try and protect taxpayers' money, try and deliver for the British people, can actually hold things back. I think if you look at that across the board, and particularly if you compare it to other walks of life, stressful jobs, high-powered businesses, but other walks of life more generally, I think people would be pretty surprised. The risk, of course, is that it leads government, ministers, politicians to look and feel to the public even more detached from reality.
You talk about a tyranny of hurt feelings, but do you think it might go even further than that? Do you think that perhaps civil servants coordinated a campaign to remove you, a political campaign?
Well, there was certainly some coordination. One of the complaints was struck out because they'd written it together. Look, put it this way. These claims, some of them were 4.5 years old. Another one was 2.5 years old. The vast majority were 8 months old. They were all submitted on the same day. Which is 15th of November. I think a few came just a little bit later. That can't be coincidental. But I only know what I know. And I also know that I was warned by a very senior member of the government, a senior civil servant, that there are increasingly activist civil servants mobilised by the FDA union who are looking to target ministers. But all I know is that I think the bar has been so lowered now that the government we've got, and I'm a huge fan and supporter of the Prime Minister, is going to struggle to drive forward the changes we need. There'll be a chilling effect, a paralysing effect on ministers. I'm already, my phone is lit up by ministers now very concerned that they could be accused of these things for behaviour that in most walks of life would be regarded as important managerial scrutiny. And I think that must be wrong.
Yeah, the paralysing effect on ministers, I think that's really interesting. I mean, some are going as far as to say that it feels as though civil servants are now in control of government, not ministers. Do you think there's any truth to that?
I think we need to be really careful about this. I've worked in a whole range of departments. I think I've held 8 ministerial posts. Vast majority of civil servants are fabulous. We can't achieve what we want in government without our officials. And my experience overwhelmingly, notwithstanding the media caricature over the last 6 months, has to have a great relationship with civil servants, my private office. They enjoy the buzz, the energy, the drive that I've tried to bring, the challenge that I've tried to bring. But the risk is a small cabal can block important reforms if hurt feelings because poor work or inadequate work is pulled up, or because more questions are asked than they feel comfortable with. And that's the challenge. And if ministers back off driving change forward, we won't be doing our job, which is, of course, not to serve the civil servants and civil service, as important and as valuable as they are, but is to serve the British public.
Going back to that small cabal you mentioned of activist civil servants who are being sort of set up by their unions, working with their unions, I mean, can we say that the British civil service is 100% impartial?
Oh, look, you've never heard me talk about the blob or the deep state or any of those, I think, lazy tropes. But, well, a cabal is just a small group. Yeah, but actually that's what I've been told by other civil servants. So I want to be clear, I'm a big fan of the British civil service. I trained as a Foreign Office lawyer for 6 years. I'm just telling you what I see, which if the bar, the threshold for bullying is so lowered that hurt feelings, irrespective of the objectively justifiable nature of my or any other minister's actions, if that's the case, where does it end? And I think there'll be a lot of people now who'll be very nervous looking over their shoulder in meetings about what they say. And particularly, at its best, the civil service operates very effectively. But where it underperforms, you often get this sort of cultural passive-aggressive, just computer says no. If you try and push on that now, the risk is you'll get a bullying claim. And I think that will have a chilling effect. And the risk is that whether it's small boats, getting the backlogs down in the courts or in the NHS, driving human rights reform, it doesn't really matter whether you're on the left or the right. The risk is that actually we can't deliver what the British people elect us to deliver.
And an element of that is that there are these activist civil servants who aren't completely impartial.
Look, again, I'm going to be very careful what I say. I'm a big fan of the civil service. I think as a whole we're very well served. I had, very grateful to all the people that work with me at the Foreign Office, with the MOJ, the Ministry of Justice, and elsewhere. But there's clearly some who have been mobilised by the FDA. You can see that from the FDA commentary right the way throughout. The FDA is bringing legal challenges. They did after Priti Patel's departure from the reporting to Priti Patel. They bring a judicial review. They try and expand the definition of bullying, and then you see claims being brought. I'm almost certain that will happen now again.
Thank you. Going back to the investigation, do you feel it was conducted fairly?
Look, I certainly wouldn't cast any aspersions on the Adam Tolley KC, a very experienced QC, but the reality is I was shorn of most of the safeguards that people in other walks of life would have. I mean, just take the delay in these claims being brought forward. If I was in an employment tribunal, bullying claim couldn't be brought after 3 months. None of these claims were brought within 3 months. There's a whole range of other things that happened. 4 times I went through the propriety and ethic team vetting process, and 4 times I was given a very clean bill of health. How can that happen if there were serious question marks around my behaviour? So I think you see in what the Prime Minister wrote back to me today that there are shortcomings in the system. I think the shame of it for me is it's come too late to change those for my benefit, but what I worry about more is getting the right balance. We must have zero tolerance of bullying. We want people to be empowered and happy and inspired and motivated in any job, in any walk of life, but particularly in government, I would say, having done that. But you can't allow the threshold to be so lowered that hurt feelings or a bit of distress that is only felt by one or two people can paralyse you from driving forward changes.
You mentioned that the threshold for bullying has been set too low. Was that the Prime Minister's fault, or was it Adam Tolley's fault? Who set that threshold too low?
Well, I think Adam Tolley was there to just find the facts, and ultimately the Prime Minister is the arbiter of the ministerial code. But Mr. Tolley very clearly in his report went beyond that and made findings in relation to that. And I think it's questionable whether the terms of reference were stuck to. But the bottom line is, and I believe in keeping my word, and I said if there was any adverse finding in relation to me, I would resign as a matter of honour and integrity, and I believe in keeping my word. But certainly the incremental shifting of the goalposts of what really counts as bullying, I think, is now a real problem. And the lack of safeguards that most ordinary people in other walks of life, a high-powered business, other parts of the operational public sector, I mean, those just don't apply. And that leaves ministers at risk. No one, least of all your viewers, are going to feel huge sympathy for any one or other individual politician. What they will be concerned about, I suspect, is our ability as government to deliver on their behalf. That's the job.
OK, so we're about halfway through this interview now. We're going to pause it there, and I'm going to come back to it in just a minute or so. I wanted to recap what's been said so far, and for me, the big standout line there was that Dominic Raab was potentially of the view that there may well be activist civil servants looking to target ministers. He said categorically that people who had their feelings hurt because of poor or inadequate work being pulled up and being raised with them, if you ask them too many questions, ministers going forward will find themselves on a bullying charge. That is a concerning precedent as far as Raab is concerned. He said that essentially the rules were changed in order to get people either sacked or criticised or up in front of bullying charges. So they maybe changed the rules on what it means to be a bully or what workplace conduct is. He called it the incremental shifting of goalposts. He said that the claims against him, one was initially brought 4.5 years old. One was 2.5 years old. There are a few others, but they were all submitted on the same day, which he was saying at least indicates that there is an element of this that was coordinated. I mean, obviously, yes, fine. His big takeaway from it, though, ultimately, that I think he was trying to get across there was that this could stop ministers driving change forward, so doing what the public want. He was clear there not to call things the blob or this big kind of woke blob of civil servants, but he did also come down very strong, and that is strong stuff there that he said exclusively to us here with Olivia Utley, about an activist element of civil servants looking to target ministers, and we should all be worried about that. Just quickly here now, he said this as well, that the risk is, whether it's small boats, human rights reforms, or anything else, the risk is that we can't deliver what the British people expect us to deliver because of the civil services computer says no attitude. So I think that is vitally important for people to hear that Dominic Raab is saying that as a former Deputy Prime Minister. Should that not be letting off alarm bells to people, I think. Now, Olivia Utley also asked Dominic Raab whether Adam Tolley Casey went beyond his remit. So this is about whether or not Dominic Raab was really fairly treated. Let's play it.
Clarify there. Would you say that Adam Tolley went beyond his remit, or is it the Prime Minister who's overreached?
Look, I'm not going to... Again, if you've called for an independent process, which I did, and I've been very clear if there was an adverse finding against me, I resign, I'm not going to then complain about the referee. What I'm just doing is structurally, and I think it's acknowledged by the Prime Minister today, pointing out that the system is flawed. And it doesn't matter so much for me. I'm not worried about that. I am worried about the effectiveness of government striking the right balance between zero tolerance of real bullying, if I can put it like that, and allowing, frankly, spurious or elastic interpretations of that to stop government serving the British people.
elastic interpretations. You say that you're still supportive of the Prime Minister, that you're going to support him from the backbenches, but isn't it a little bit weak of him to have accepted this elastic interpretation of what bullying means and accept your resignation?
Well, look, I think the process and the system of dealing with these complaints was there when he arrived. There was obviously no independent ethics advisor, and I think people would have been very surprised if the first reform he did as he came into government was something along those lines. It would have, I don't think that would have sent the right message, and he had to deal with the rules and the process that were in place, and I understand that, and I'd always recognised that. The fact that it's provided what I think is a very flawed outcome for me and a very dangerous precedent is one thing. What we do need to do, though, now is get it right, because otherwise good people doing a good job serving the British people will be put at risk, and then the whole system of government gums up. And by the way, I've heard Labour MPs complaining about this today as well. So it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right, actually it's very dangerous. This is about fairly fundamental principles of ministerial responsibility and democratic accountability.
From what you say, you don't talk about the blob or anything like that, but from what you're saying, it sounds a little bit as though both you and the Prime Minister have been caught up in a system which is outside of government control. Does that bring any truth?
I don't think I'd put it like that. But what is certainly true is that you've got an overwhelming majority of excellent civil servants. I've been Foreign Secretary, I've travelled around the world. Most countries would die for public servants that we've got, or a democracy the way that we've got. But there has been a subtle shift over time, and you are seeing more, as I put it, activist civil servants. It's a small minority, but if a small minority can knock out a cabinet member, that has a very serious effect.
In retrospect, do you consider any of your actions as misguided?
Well, misguided, I'm sure. Look, I'm a human. I make mistakes all the time.
Wrong, then.
Look, there was one element which we discussed, one claim, where I'd said to a government lawyer, having had a long, really good, rigorous debate, and we got a bit further in the way that I wanted to, and I said to him, look, there's no point in sulking about it. Now, no one claimed this was bullying and no complaint was made. I think I look back on that and think, do you know what, I could have chosen my words better. Equally, I spent a lot of my time encouraging, empowering, rewarding great work in the civil service. I, out my own pocket, put on drinks and receptions and things like that. They've been recognised in the honours system, partly at my recommendation. I spent a lot of time engaging with officials. So I'm sure over a microscope, if you look back over 4.5 years, I'd think, oh, I'd want to do that better. But I don't think on any occasion what I did amounted to bullying.
There was one allegation which I think was upheld in the Adam Tolley report. There was a senior member, a senior official who was removed from a team when you were negotiating on Gibraltar. Do you regret removing him from that team, changing the personnel?
No, it was absolutely essential. The individual concerned had breached the negotiating mandate, had allowed discussions in relation to Gibraltar with the Spanish to involve allowing law enforcement officials from Spain to act in the territory of Gibraltar. That would have undermined our sovereignty position on Gibraltar. As Adam Tolley said, I didn't shout, I didn't swear, I didn't lose my temper, but I did need him to be replaced. He wasn't demoted. There was no other penalty. And actually, I think Adam Tolley just got that one wrong. And I think if people understood how close we came to a no-deal outcome for Gibraltar, which if that had happened, put at risk the border, Spanish putting up blocks on the border, which would have created real economic damage for the territory of Gibraltar. I think if people understood that as a result of the mistakes that were made and the clean-up operation that we took to salvage that negotiation, I mean, you may remember the free trade agreement was struck on Christmas Eve of 2020. A week later, we got the deal with the Spanish on Gibraltar. And I pay tribute to the new team that came in. So it's, couldn't have done it without great civil servants. But we were up to 1 a.m. on New Year's Eve because of the mistakes that were made. And it was absolutely essential to turn that around and salvage that negotiation to replace the individual involved.
Thank you. So if you had your time again, is there anything that you would do differently?
I probably would have, taken more people that I could rely on into the room, because at the end of the day, the stuff that has come back to haunt me is he said, she said complaints from a long time ago are based on subjective hurt feelings. I have to be honest, if my behaviour had been so bad, I should have been warned about it, and if I'd have known there was an ambush waiting for me, I'm not sure I would have come back into government in October of last year. That's the real truth.
Really? So there's no element of your conduct specifically that you would point to and say, I was wrong there, I would do that differently?
Well, I gave you an example. Look, sometimes, you get things wrong, you don't compromise maybe the way you should have done, or you use the wrong phrasing. Look, if you work in any high-pressure job, whether it's a broadcasting newsroom, a newspaper, press conference kind of scenario, or a high-powered business, these things will happen, but none of it amounted to bullying.
You say there, interestingly, that you would probably not have come back into government in October had you realised there was an ambush waiting for you. Do you think there's a danger that competent politicians will just simply not want to serve in government because they're afraid of this cabal of civil servants?
You know, when I knock on doors here in Esher and Walton, even throughout all of this episode, people don't understand why anyone would want to become a politician. If on top of all of the hard work, long hours, weekends lost and all the rest of it, the lousy reputation politics as a whole have, if on the end of that you've got this risk of being subject to trial by media, and of course in the case of me it's legitimate reporting, I don't complain about that, but with all of the risk of being subject to that kind of targeted approach, I think it's obviously going to deter good, competent people from outside politics, from other walks of life, coming into it.
Back on the tyranny of hurt feelings for a minute, do you think there's a generational element to this? Are there sort of millennials who aren't used to the workplace as another generation would have it? Is there a bit of a generational divide going on here?
Do you know, I wondered that. But the interesting thing is none of the complaints by junior members of staff were upheld. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that some were made, and some of them were ludicrous, people complaining who'd never been in a meeting with me and things like that. But actually, the much bigger issue in the civil service is at the senior management level. We've got amazing civil servants, they do a great job. I couldn't have achieved any of the things I've been involved with in politics without them. But I think there's a problem of responsibility at the Director and Director General level. And I think that's a much, much bigger issue than the culture of the newer recruits coming up the ranks. Actually, if anything, I found the younger officials to be the ones lit up by the challenge, the ambition, the energy that I've brought, and often they've stopped me and said that to me directly.
So some of these activist civil servants that you've been talking about, they're in the more senior echelons of the civil service.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you one example, and I'm not going to name names, but just to give you a sense, one person complained that it amounted to bullying because as I tried to shine a light on good practice and pointed out teams that had done a good job, I didn't mention that particular person. Now, you know, I can understand why someone's nose might be put out if I don't tell them they've done a great job, although I'm not sure in this case it was merited. But for that to amount to bullying or anything on the same level, I mean, that's just not serious.
And that's the senior civil servant that you're talking about?
Very.
Thank you very much. Just a couple more questions. Essentially, it seems to me that either the allegations were politically motivated, or there are the people making the allegations were essentially snowflakes who need to toughen up a bit, or that you are a bully. Which is it?
Well, it's definitely not the third. Look, I don't use the language of snowflakes and all of that.
Toughen up, then.
I think resilience is important, particularly at the senior level. But the bottom line is you've got to be able to have direct conversations with people. That's the way we have that challenge. I've always relished when people were very direct with me. I don't want to sort of wonder, well, what did they really mean by that? And in fact, at the most senior level, all of my permanent secretaries have said two things. One, they've got to know what good looks like. Please explain it very clearly. And you've got to give them feedback directly. If you look at what the Adam Tolley report suggests, it is almost as if Now ministers cannot give feedback directly to civil servants, including senior civil servants. If that's the case, everything will slow down and we will not get the clarity, the direction, the drive, the energy, the delivery that we need.
And we could get into a situation quite soon where civil servants become the tail wagging the dog. Civil servants running the government?
Well, look, there's a cultural, as in any organisation, whether it's public or private sector, there'll be a culture, and there's a cultural aversion to some of the things. Clearly, the civil service was not wild about Brexit, but in a way, that doesn't, that's one thing. They didn't universally welcome human rights reform. I think lots of folk in government were, not all, were reticent about that. And that's fine. And in a way, I want contrary opinions when I was a minister being played back to me. I want that challenge. But once you've decided, and once the minister has set the course, given the decision, set the steer, it must be right, if we've got an impartial and independent civil service, and that's really important, that is then delivered faithfully.
Thank you very much. Just one final question. Did you throw the tomatoes?
Not only did I not throw any tomatoes, that allegation was regarded as so specious it wasn't even put to me. And what I can tell you is in the course of the investigation, one press officer from government was subject to disciplinary proceedings for spreading misinformation. I should also say, and this is important given what we've been discussing, the people that reported that individual were themselves civil servants.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for speaking to us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
They're speaking exclusively with GB News and Olivia Utley. Fantastic interview, by the way, Olivia, there. I'm going to run through some of the highlights of that interview, OK? I'm going to start right from the top and rattle through it. So he claims that some of the claims that were made against him were 4.5 years old, 2.5 years old, and yet miraculously they were all brought on the same day in what one could be forgiven for thinking might be some kind of coordinated effort to bring him down. He did allude to activist elements of the civil service led by unions making concerted efforts to bring down government ministers because they disagreed with government ideology. He went on to say that this could have serious implications for the government pressing ahead or being able to press ahead with ideas like stopping the boats. He said that people who had hurt feelings because their poor or inadequate work was pulled up and were asked questions about that were now essentially out to get him. I should also point out that line at the end there was quite good, wasn't it? Dominic Raab telling GB News exclusively he definitely did not throw a tomato, and that the person who made that allegation to him, which did find its way into the national press, was subsequently disciplined for spreading false information, which does play into his hands when it comes to his claim that he had trial by media and that he was not subject to the same HR referrals as other people would and that he wasn't warned about them. He does say as well, and I thought this was fascinating, we talk a lot about snowflakes, don't we? He said this, he said he wouldn't call anyone snowflakes, he didn't like that. He was asked and pressed by Olivia Utley about whether or not he still felt as though people should toughen up. Now, get this, Raab said that one person claimed that he bullied them when he praised a group of people for doing a good job and he didn't name them personally. So he said that he faced a claim of bullying because one person wasn't named personally as he was essentially going around the room saying who had done a good job. And that, I think, is where we're at. There's rather a lot that Raab also added to here. He did say that there was, he said, she said, easy for me to say, subjective claims here made long after the event, and that one person who had particular bitterness towards him was an individual who was helping to negotiate our Gibraltar/Brexit deal. And that person, according to Dominic Raab, jeopardised the entire Gibraltar Brexit process and could have led to a catastrophic situation taking place there. He says that they went way beyond their brief and made huge mistakes. And Dominic Raab says that without any shouting or screaming whatsoever, that person wasn't even demoted, but they were moved on from the team. And supposedly that, in some way, constitutes bullying. Joining me now is the former head of press at Number 10. It's Giles Kenningham, MBE. Giles, thank you very much. I hope you managed to hear a fair bit of that whilst you were sitting on the line there. It looks like you did. Yes, OK. What do you make of it?
You know, I think thought Raab came across pretty well in that interview. I think he gave a pretty considered defence of his position. What happened actually raised some pretty salient points there. You know, one thing which really struck me from having read that report was how it was pulled up in the report that civil servants who don't perform, that ministers shouldn't hold them to account. They should be held to account by permanent secretaries. Now, to be quite blunt, ministers have got a democratic mandate, unlike civil servants. Ministers should be free to hold civil servants to account in any way possible. And I think you do. I think it is fair to raise huge red flags around this report. The fact that, you know, if there were issues, and they may well have been, why were they all brought at once in a coordinated way? Why was there a time lag in them being brought as well? And, you know, and I have to say that, you know, there is a real danger of this having a chilling effect on the civil service and on ministers and how they behave. You know, it is one of the sort of only sort of, I suppose, organisations left in the world where it's very difficult to sack someone, and that can't be a good
Giles,
thing.
that was epitomised by what Dominic Raab had to say to Olivia Utley there when he said that there was an individual who massively breached the terms of the negotiations with the Spanish over Gibraltar, and what that person, according to Dominic Raab, nearly did was allow Spanish police boots onto the ground in Gibraltar, a huge infringement of British sovereignty, and that set them back in the negotiations big time. That person wasn't even demoted. They were moved out of a team with no shouting and screaming, and that apparently constitutes inappropriate behaviour, Giles. Has the world gone mad?
Yeah, look, I mean, I have to say, like, as Dominic said, there are some fantastic civil servants, having worked with them. You know, I remember situations where we were told that the only way to get rid of a poorly performing civil servant was effectively to promote out of their job upwards, which quite frankly is absolutely ridiculous. And in what other walk of life would that happen? So I think we need to be very careful. You know, as we said here, you know, amongst this report, we found out, what about the civil servants who've been misbehaving? What about the civil servants who've been putting fake news in the press about Dominic Raab? You know, that also needs to be brought to light. You know, it's not you know, it's not all one-way traffic.
But Giles, I've got to say, you know, Rishi Sunak will know all of this. Rishi Sunak will have known all of this. Dominic Raab has come down and sat down and done an interview, which, from my opinion, had Rishi Sunak said, I am standing by Dominic Raab, this man is not going anywhere, and then Dominic Raab had come out and just delivered that exact interview, I'm sorry, I don't think this is a massive story in tomorrow's front pages that, you know, Raab stays. I mean, it would be on the front page, but it wouldn't be this huge controversy. I think most people would listen to that and think, yeah, that was the right call. Why didn't Rishi Sunak have the bottle to do that? Has he caved in here?
Yeah, I suppose there are a couple of things here. I suppose Raab, as he conceded himself in the interview, said if there were any adverse findings of this report or this investigation, then he would fall on his sword and go, which there were. And I suppose, you know, look, Sunak's made a big thing about, you know, being a government of integrity, accountability, high levels of transparency. Clearly, there were parts of this report which weren't wholly positive, which were troubling for him, and felt like probably, you know, on the balance of probabilities that he should go. But I agree with you. I actually think, you know, having looked at it, having looked at the evidence in its entirety, having looked at Raab give a full and frank account of his behaviour, that potentially he could have survived, and actually the public sentiment probably on the balance of it would have said, yeah, look, you know, okay, you're not perfect. You, by your own standards, can see that you weren't perfect in all situations, but people aren't perfect in life anyway. And that probably he could have stayed and ridden this one out.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's be honest with you, most people are not dealing with the kind of thing on a daily basis. And I'm not trying to say that anything goes, but, you know, there are certain jobs that are much more stressful than others. And I think it is reasonable to expect people to maybe behave slightly differently at very high pressure, high stakes times in their careers than they would if they were doing other jobs. Just quickly, sorry, while I've got you, Giles, if that's all right, I want to get you on this because he's mentioned there, very cleverly worded, but reading between the lines, I think we all know what he meant about this. Activist civil servants under the control of unions who are looking to bring down ministers. Is our civil service infiltrated by activists?
I don't think I could generalise across the board here, but I would say in this instance, one does have to raise questions about how there seemingly was a coordinated effort with a number of these being complaints raised on the same day, which is no coincidence, and the huge time lag within which these complaints were brought. And I would also say that fundamentally, the civil service as an entity, while there are some brilliant people, needs to be overhauled. There needs to be greater degrees of accountabilities. And if people perform poorly, they should be fired. That's what happens in the private sector. Seemingly that doesn't happen in the civil in the civil service. Now, if people feel like they are bulletproof in these situations, you are going to get poor performance. And one thing that I noted when I was in the civil service was we came in after a Labour government where Tony Blair would be doing a reshuffle every 8 months. So you'd get a civil service, you thought, well, that minister's not going to stay around for very long, therefore, who cares? We'll do what we want. You know, under David Cameron, he tried to bring a level of continuity. And in those departments where you left secretaries of state for a sustained period of time, they were much more effective, and the civil service had to get their act together. So I do think there is something in the system which needs to be fundamentally reformed.
And now, I'll very briefly, Giles, sorry about this, just one more, very briefly, which is Dominic Raab's key point there was, if these are the rules now, it's going to be impossible for government ministers to do their job. If the civil service is looking at the fact that they've managed to oust a Deputy Prime Minister based on two pretty spurious claims being upheld about, as he said, she said, subjective views, he said he was ambushed about this, then how on earth can any member of Rishi Sunak's cabinet do their job?
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be difficult. You're going to have lots of ministers looking over their shoulders. You're probably going to have people being more risk averse, which is not a good thing at a time when you do need bold, radical thinking. So yeah, there is a real danger this has a chilling effect. And I hope that Sunak speaks to and empowers his cabinet to say, look, you should still be bold in what you do and you have my backing.
Look, thank you very, very much, Giles. Great to have you on the show. Great to get your live reaction to what was our exclusive interview there. Giles Cunningham, MBE, who's former head of press at Number 10. What do you make of that massive interview, that with Dominic Raab? Well done to Olivia Utley. You can go online after this show and see a full version of that interview with Dominic Raab speaking exclusively to GB News, where he went through a whole ream of stuff. It was enlightening and fascinating. Get us on Twitter, on YouTube, however you want to digest it. It'll be on the website as well. Make sure you watch that in full. But I'm joined now by our political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, thank you very much. Well, that was a very enlightening interview, I thought, by Dominic Raab, was it not?
Yes, it was, wasn't it? Now, Rishi Sunak and Number 10 will be hoping that the story is going to move on from this quite quickly. Rishi Sunak has appointed Oliver Dowden as Deputy Prime Minister. He's appointed Alex Choke as Justice Secretary. He would dearly like, having lost his key ally, and it will have been very difficult for Rishi Sunak, to move on, to get back to focusing on the priorities. But Dominic Raab, as we have heard in that absolutely fascinating interview just there, really feels that he has been wronged. Now, he was quite careful how he chose his words. He was keen to say several times he was a big fan of the civil service, that most of them were brilliant, but also to say that different rules had been applied to him. He was talking about the length of time that you can make complaints within, saying in an employment tribunal, in a normal workplace, if you didn't come up with a complaint within 3 months, then it would be null and void. And also talking about how low the bar was set, and that basically hurt feelings should be just that, hurt feelings, and worries about it constraining the government in attempts to do its job if civil servants are going to be so delicate in their feelings. I should say, though, that there were, of course, complaints by multiple people, and clearly the report does mention, says his conduct, he went beyond what was reasonably necessary. His conduct was bound to be experienced as undermining or humiliating by the affected individual. He must have been aware of this effect, or he ought reasonably to have been aware. Well, it certainly seems from what Dominic Raab is saying that he certainly was not aware at all. And in fact, he says nobody had told him this was bullying until this report.
Yeah, look, Catherine, thank you very, very much. Catherine Forster, our political reporter on Downing Street. Now, let me just whiz through some of the key things that stood out to me. First and foremost, Dominic Raab. He'd been accused, it was all over the British press, of him throwing a tomato at a civil servant in a fit of rage. He's come out on GB News and confirmed that he did not throw the tomato. He's also confirmed that the person who told that story was sanctioned, i.e. it was complete fabrication. That found its way into the British press, which ties into his view that he was dumb with trial by media. Raab referred to activist elements in the civil service being led by unions who want to bring down government ministers whose ideologies they disagree with, which is a concern for people. And when one looks at the claims that were made against Dominic Raab and how they were upheld, just two of them, and the manner in which they were upheld, it ties in with the idea now that some of these claims went back 4.5 years, some went back 2.5 years, but they were all miraculously brought on the same day. And he, as he said right here to Olivia Utley, that was not warned previously about any of his conduct. Maybe that ties into that. And I just want to raise one thing as well that made me chuckle at the time. Dominic Raab said that one person who claimed that he bullied them was because when he was praising a room of people for doing a good job, he didn't name them personally. And we wonder, don't we, I think sometimes, why people think that there is a snowflake culture out there. Dominic did resign this morning, though, didn't he? After an inquiry found that he had acted, quote, intimidating and insultingly in his manner with civil servants. Raab hit back against the inquiry. He did speak, like I said, exclusively to GB News earlier. He said, we risk a small cabal blocking reforms because of hurt feelings. And he's been warned of increasing civil service activism. So, should he have been made to resign? I suspect not, really. If he had stayed and Sunak had kept him, and you just heard that full-length interview right now, a lot of you have been getting in touch on this, by the way, to say there's no way that he should have gone. I think that it would have been less of a story than the one that it is turning out to be right now. But should he have been made to resign? Are the civil service really just a load of snowflakes who don't like it when they're told that their work isn't up to scratch? Joining me now is William Atkinson, assistant editor of Conservative Home, and political commentator Matthew Stadlen. I will start with you, William. What do you make of this, then? Do you think, based on what we know right now, that the civil service is a bunch of snowflakes and Raab shouldn't have gone?
Yes, but I don't think that's really news. We know, as you rightly pointed out, the civil service is one of the few organisations, it seems, in the world where it's impossible to sack anybody, however useless that they are. Dominic Raab's tragedy is that he bothered to point this out to some people who were working for him. They didn't like it. They've created various spurious campaigns, which have been labelled bullying. And as a consequence, he has been forced out. And I think it is tragedy for both Dominic Raab and his career, but more importantly, for future ministers. They are going to be constantly watching their backs. And our civil service, which is already too large and too useless, has now got free rein to kick out any ministers in future that it dislikes. The duffers have triumphed today, essentially.
But Matthew, would you feel bullied if I was doing a review of this show and I said that my guests were fabulous, but I didn't name you in person?
No, I just correct you and explain to you that actually I was doing a perfectly good job. Thank you, Patrick. No, look, what William says is that the civil service is somehow too useless. I mean, Dominic Raab himself said in that interview with Olivia that the civil servants had enabled him to do what he did. He wouldn't have been able to do some of the extraordinary things that he probably thinks he has done without the help of the civil service. Look, this is an old bugbear of or maybe even a relatively new bugbear of the right-wing media. They want to go after what they see as the blob. There wasn't anything bombshell about these revelations as far as I can see, and that has given oxygen precisely to elements in the right-wing media to say that this is all some sort of conspiracy. Now, it's true, it seems that some of the claims against Raab were dismissed. Fair enough. I think if you're going to put a King's Counsel in charge of this sort of report, we have to have some degree of trust in what he finds. And we mustn't lose sight of the fact you keep mentioning a senior civil servant who was forced to go or moved aside over Gibraltar. Yeah. It was found in this report that Raab had behaved while Justice Secretary in an intimidating and insulting manner. Now, it is absolutely possible, I know this from many years, decades in the workplace myself, it is absolutely possible to demand exacting standards or to have demanding standards of oneself And it's possible to demand that without being intimidating or insulting.
I get that. I do get that. But potentially, when you are staring someone in the face who might have just completely kiboshed Britain's relationship with Spain, I think that there might be call there for a slightly more forceful tone of language, Matthew. I'll just go back to you, Willie, before I go back to Matthew. I mean, do you think that Dominic Raab actually, frankly, really, has got grounds for, had he not resigned, he'd have grounds for unlawful dismissal?
Yes, I would say it's always bizarre to find out that these ministers, as with Priti Patel and Suella Braverman last year, who are accused of bullying civil servants, tend to be A, Brexiteers, and B, ministers who are trying to push through policy agendas that it's well known that many of their staff don't actually like or agree with. And yes, I could say that Raab probably feels hard done by, and he probably does have various grounds to suggest that. As I say, well, according to this report, bullying is in the eye of the beholder, and I don't think, as it suggests at various different points, that staring at people or demanding that you turn up at meetings on time could really be reasonably classed as bullying. But I think, more importantly, I think Rishi Sunak is probably quietly relieved that Dominic Raab has gone, simply for the fact that if he'd remained in place, you would have seen a sort of spectrum of resignations from the civil service and Labour making hay out of it for the next couple of weeks.
Matthew, does it set a worrying precedent, not just for Dominic Raab, but for people like us, for anyone really, that 4.5 years after an event, someone can get together and say, this man, I felt intimidated by this chap, and there's no huge scrutiny about it. Then a load of stuff gets briefed to the press, which turns out to not be that true or true at all, and only a couple of the incidents get found to have actually been proven, and you have to lose your job. I mean, do we want to live in that world?
Well, the language or the behaviour that was described by this King's Counsel as intimidating and insulting seems to have happened when he was Justice Secretary. He hasn't been Justice Secretary for that long. So let's get some perspective on this overall. No one is saying, I don't think, that you should not be able to have robust exchanges in the workplace. No one is saying, certainly not me, that you shouldn't demand high standards, both of those who work beneath you or alongside you, but also of yourself. And I think there certainly will be people, bosses up and down the country, who will be examining themselves, thinking about their own behaviour.
They'll be terrified.
Wondering whether they've got it right or not. You can look at this two ways, can't you? You can suggest has said that there may be a chilling effect on civil servants, or you can say, well, if you're the Deputy Prime Minister, and indeed, whoever you are, you should behave in a way that is not intimidating and insulting, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, both of you, thank you very much. Good stuff, that. That's William Atkinson there, as Assistant Editor of Conservative Home, and political commentator Matthew Stadler. Now, look, yet again, cheeky little plug. There's more than a cheeky little plug. I am screaming at you to go and check out the full interview that Olivia Utley did with Dominic Raab. We played you that. It's what we've been reacting off the back of for the last 20 minutes. Some massive, massive claims in this, essentially, from Raab, which is that there are activist elements of the civil service willfully trying to bring down government ministers at the behest of their unions. That will stop the government doing things like stopping the small boats, stopping anything, frankly, that people of the civil service do not agree with. He says that there were lies thrown about him. He's never thrown a tomato. And also, again, some of the claims about this, I think, set a really damning precedent. He says that one person claimed that he bullied them because he didn't praise them in person for doing a good job when he praised other people. Snowflake City. It's an avalanche out there. Emily Carver, you're up next.
Yes, well, don't go and watch. People at home, please don't go watch the full interview yet, because we will be showing clips and we will be getting live reaction from Jacob Rees-Mogg, who, of course, is a Conservative MP and GB News presenter.
Come on, talk about this. You got Moggy on.
We've got him on straight top of the show. He's going to be giving his live reaction to Olivia Utley's fantastic interview, enlightening interview with Dominic Raab, and then we'll be debating off the back of that with my wonderful panel.
Yeah, look, we really are the place to be if you want to get all of the latest lowdown when it comes to not just Dominic Raab going, but frankly, the culture of the civil service and the very concerning direction in which our country, I think, is heading. Stay locked in. Dubes & Co. with Emily Carver and Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. A lot of cloud across England and Wales today. Sunnier skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland, although there'll be some fog appearing in places overnight. Now, the cloud that we've seen across England and Wales continues into the evening, but the showers tend to die away. One exception, northern England, where there'll be continuous outbreaks of rain on and off through the night, and a few showery outbreaks for the Midlands. Now, the cloud edges into Northern Ireland as well as southern Scotland, but we keep the clear skies for northern Scotland, with the exception of the far northeast of Scotland, where we've got some mist and low cloud. But all in all, high pressure is pushing away. That's allowing weather fronts to slowly move north, as well as low pressure, turning the weather more changeable this weekend before it turns colder at the end of the weekend. So we start the weekend with a lot of cloud cover, some mist and fog in the far south, as well as the far northeast of Scotland. A touch of frost where we've got clear skies overnight, but actually the cloudy conditions mean that most places will be frost-free, and outbreaks of rain will push into central and southern Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland by the